Chapter 21-26. Over the years, Luo Fan had relied on the various cultivation holy lands on the third level of the Tao Master's Path. He had combined the endless principles and mysteries within it to condense the item that could only be the foundation of achieving the Tao into something between a divine sense and a magic treasure. The best experience of reading novels is here. This item was mysterious and wonderful. It was both tangible and illusory at the same time. It also had the various magical effects of the foundation of achieving the Tao. Moreover, because it contained the various mysteries of the cultivation holy lands, the magical effects of assisting cultivation had become even more powerful and wonderful. However, after Luo Fan had condensed it over the years, it already contained the power of a primordial origin spiritual treasure. At this moment, in his hands, this item could even unleash a power that surpassed his own by a level. In other words, as long as Luo Fan wanted to, he could even use this item to easily crush all existences on the third level of the Tao Master's Path. Even the boy who was originally the ruler of the third level of the Tao Master's Path would be the same. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan had little interest in crushing those cultivators. At this time, his attention was on the fifth tribulation that could descend at any time above the void. This fifth tribulation was looming, and the degree of danger was sometimes high and sometimes low. The pressure it brought to him was also sometimes strong and sometimes weak, giving him a very strange feeling. It was as if an extremely powerful cultivator was confronting him, looking for his flaws, and could launch a fatal blow at any time. Let me see what mysteries the fifth tribulation has. Luo Fan quietly looked at the sky, and such thoughts flashed through his mind. Then, with a slight movement of his heart, a figure walked out of his body and directly stepped into the figure that seemed to be lying on its side in his hand. The figure that walked out of his body was extremely mysterious, and it revealed an extremely strong aura that belonged to the worldview of laws. In addition to this aura, there was also an eternal and inextinguishable aura that was much stronger than before. It was as if it was a supreme Tao Master, a supreme true saint that came from the state of chaos. That was none other than his worldview. However, at this moment, his view of the world had undergone a huge change compared to before. At this moment, the worldview looked almost the same as the real him. Although the changes of light and darkness still existed, they were already extremely weak, or at least looked extremely weak. It was as if all the concepts within the world had merged into one, and all the concepts had been developed to the same level. The instant the figure entered the figure lying on the side, the figure that was originally only the size of a palm began to rapidly expand. In the blink of an eye, it had already surpassed its original size and expanded to a length of 10,000 feet. Lying on the side, it was like a mountain range. This was naturally an insignificant change compared to the third level of the Tao Master's Path. Not to mention the third level itself, it could even be considered insignificant compared to any of the substances in it. After all, everything in the third level contained an almost perfect world. It possessed almost infinite space and time. A distance of 10,000 feet was obviously an insignificant existence for any part of the world and any space-time. However, although it was insignificant compared to any of the substances in the third level itself, with the change, an earth-shattering chi power began to be released from it. This kind of aura belonged to a part of Luo Fan, but more than that, it was a kind of aura that surpassed Luo Fan's. It belonged to a higher and more powerful existence. Just by sensing this chi power, it was as if a wisp of the true saint's chi power had been intercepted. The entire third level of the Tao Master's Path began to tremble slightly during this process. Faintly, there was some kind of wonderful fluctuation born out of thin air in various parts of the third level of the Tao Master's Path. It began to constantly spread in all directions, and finally gradually linked together to form a boundless sea of fluctuations. This change did not seem to be formed by the spread of the chi power. On the contrary, It seemed that the third level of the Tao Master's path had naturally produced some kind of change in response to the emergence of this Qi power. At this moment, a kind of incomparably terrifying Qi power flashed by. Under this Qi power, the Qi power that had caused the entire third level of the Tao Master's path to change completely disappeared in an instant. Along with the Qi power, the 10,000 feet tall figure lying on its side, and the body of Luo Fan, who was standing only a few feet in front of the figure, disappeared as well. Where did he go? As the ruler of the third level of the Tao Master's path, a look of horror appeared on the boy's face at this time. He began to use his perception to sweep every corner of the entire third level of the Tao Master's path to find the source of this upheaval, which was the existence of Luo Fan. Originally, the situation where Luo Fan had left his perception and he could not locate him at all should have been considered a natural change for the boy, and he was even a little numb to it. He did not sense Luo Fan's existence, so he should not be a little surprised. However, as the ruler of the third level, the moment Luo Fan disappeared this time, he knew that the situation this time was completely different from any previous times. This time, Luo Fan's disappearance was not of his own will at all, but the result of some kind of force that he could not understand at all. This situation made him, who had established a good relationship with Luo Fan, feel inexplicably worried. At the same time, an indescribable sense of humiliation emerged from the bottom of his heart. Since when did the third level of the Tao Master's path become a public toilet? What kind of force can come and go as it pleases? Due to this humiliation and worry, this time, the power of his thorough investigation was unprecedentedly strong. Not only did he sweep through all the places that he knew existed, but he also swept through the various places that he had previously confirmed through Luo Fan, such as the origin of the rules, and the gap between heaven and earth and the state of chaos. However, no matter how hard he searched and how hard he tried, he could not find any trace of Luo Fan's existence. It was as if there had never been an expert like Luo Fan in the third level of the Tao Master's path, let alone the existence of the individual cultivator who could communicate with this boy. Where did he go? He murmured, his eyes a little dazed. At this time, his heart skipped a beat. He felt that the conspirator was coming toward him. He immediately understood that the conspirator had something to say. With a pull of his hand, the conspirator, who originally needed a few breaths to rush over, instantly crossed time and space and appeared in front of him. Do you know something? The boy did not ask what the conspirator wanted to say, but asked directly. After all, the conspirator was not a fool. Naturally, he knew what the boy would think if he appeared here at this time. Since he dared to appear here, it showed that he was extremely clear about what the boy wanted to know. I may know where he is, the conspirator said to the boy at this time. Hearing this, the boy was shocked and said, "Where is he?" He cultivates the path of retrogression. This thing is full of tribulations. I'm afraid he has already encountered another tribulation. The conspirator sighed at this time. At this moment, there was a sigh in his heart, with regret and a deep sense of pity. Originally, he was quite optimistic about Luo Fan and thought that he was very likely to become a Tao Master. At least, the probability was much higher than that of cultivators like them. However, he did not expect that Luo Fan would go so far on the path of retrogression. Judging from the terrifying aura before the tribulation broke out this time, it was obvious that this tribulation was not what Luo Fan had encountered. It was the first tribulation that the path of retrogression would inevitably encounter. It might not even be the second, but the third. In this case, it also meant that he had accumulated a lot of bad habits and could not turn back. If he had not encountered a tribulation, his foundation would not be stable, and there was still a great chance for him to turn back to the right path. However, once he encountered a tribulation and obtained the benefits contained in it, then his foundation would be completely fixed. No matter how powerful the divine sense, how powerful the power, or even if he became a Tao Master, it would be difficult for him to change his path of cultivation. In other words, now, in his eyes, Luo Fan had no future, and the opportunity to become a Tao Master had completely disappeared. How could the conspirator, who was originally very optimistic about Luo Fan, not feel regret and pity? Tribulation. The boy could not help but sigh at this time. I didn't expect that there would be such a tribulation. Moreover, its power is so strong that even I have no confidence in holding on for long. At this time, there was also regret and pity in his expression, and even an inexplicable sadness. Luo Fan naturally did not care about the various discussions that the boy and the conspirator had about him. At this moment, he had already arrived at an indescribable place. There seemed to be infinite things around here, endless light and shadow, as if endless space-time overlapped, superimposed, or just some kind of special movement of a pure thing. In this indescribable place, an overwhelming evil chi filled the void, filling all the areas that he could sense. Various kinds of terrifying and unparalleled pressure constantly descended from the void, constantly pressing down on him and enveloping all the areas that he could sense at this time. The figure that he had condensed, which seemed to be a magic treasure and a divine sense, stood beside him. The figure's face was blurry, and it was constantly trembling and squirming. It was as if it was constantly changing its appearance and posture, as if it was trying to stabilize a certain form, but it was unable to do so, and it was difficult for it to truly take shape. However, although the face was blurred, the aura that it released did not weaken at all. At this time, it blotted out the sky and covered the earth, directly pushing away the terrifying pressure from the endless, baleful aura above. It also pushed away the ever-changing light and shadow that seemed to be formed from billions of overlapping space-time, causing a rare small vacuum to appear around it and Luo Fan. At this moment, the countless light and shadow in the surroundings began to surge. A wisp of aura that far surpassed the aura released by the blurred figure appeared out of nowhere, instantly suppressing the powerful aura. In an instant, Luo Fan felt the figure that was both a divine sense and a magic treasure tremble slightly, and its aura was completely crushed. The figure itself also endured unimaginably terrifying pressure, and in an instant, it was pressed into Luo Fan's body, brazenly fusing with his body, forming some kind of subtle light and shadow that barely protected its body at this moment. An indescribable expression appeared on Luo Fan's face. It was a little dazed and a little lost. At this moment, endless evil chi surged down, directly blasting into the endless light and shadow below. In an instant, the light and shadow collapsed and exploded. Terrifying shock waves were continuously produced and continuously dissipated. In an instant, the scene around Luo Fan's body turned into something that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. It was gray, as if it was in a state of chaos. At this moment, Luo Fan felt as if he had truly entered a state of chaos. His perception of the outside world, and even his perception of himself, was rapidly disappearing. As for his power, his body, his worldview, and even the magic treasure that had fused with him, that was both a magic treasure and a divine sense, were continuously collapsing and being annihilated in this process. They were constantly assimilated and corroded by everything in the surroundings. Not good. At this moment, such a thought appeared in Luo Fan's mind. With this thought in mind, he frantically urged his worldview, and with the help of this worldview, he continuously urged the magic treasure that was both a divine sense and a divine sense. As he urged it, the subtle shadow that covered the surface of his body began to strengthen rapidly. It gradually emitted a more and more intense light, and its power also became more and more powerful. His resistance to everything in the outside world began to increase, allowing him to finally regain his various senses bit by bit. However, it was obvious that this was not a simple matter. During this entire process, he felt as if he was enduring the impact of an unknown number of trillions of worlds at every single moment. It seemed as if the pain and pressure at every single instant were already approaching his limits. He had a feeling that if he were to relax, even a little, he would be completely assimilated and devoured by the chaos in the surroundings. Luo Fan had seen the simulated state of chaos and other states that were similar to the state of chaos countless times. It was so much so that the most direct and easiest to come into contact with was the existence in the gap between the world and the state of chaos. In fact, it already had many characteristics of the state of chaos. However, no matter where he'd come into contact with it in the past, the simulated state of chaos, even if it was the state of chaos simulated by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, seemed insignificant compared to the gray state that appeared around Luo Fan's body at this moment. Back then, the simulated state of chaos, even if it was the one simulated by the connate, inextinguishable spiritual light, had traces of imitations, and one could tell that it wasn't the true state of chaos. But now, Luo Fan clearly knew that this was the manifestation of his fifth tribulation, but he couldn't see any flaws in it. This place seemed to be the true state of chaos, and everything here seemed to be a part of the state of chaos that could be extracted from the state of chaos. Here, all sorts of sensations, pain, and pressure that he had felt when he entered the state of chaos with the help of his clone swarmed over. Furthermore, it was more painful, more dangerous, and more terrifying than when he had sensed it with his clone. When he shifted his perspective to the conceptual level, he discovered that the changes in the conceptual level weren't much different from the changes in reality. His concept of existence was also being impacted and crushed by the strange state of chaos around him. Vaguely, it felt like it couldn't hold on any longer and was about to collapse. Luo Fan's concept of existence had been enhanced and tempered time and time again, and it had now turned into the appearance of the world of laws. In other words, it was the appearance of his true body. At this moment, under the corrosive impact of the strange and dusky concepts, his concept of existence was being corroded and assimilated at the same time as his true body, gradually melting in the dusky. There must be a flaw. This tribulation definitely has something to do with me. This thought constantly flickered in Luo Fan's mind. It was this thought that supported him to constantly search the surroundings for any possible flaws. This place definitely couldn't be the true state of chaos. This place must only be his fifth tribulation. Since it couldn't be the true state of chaos, then there must be something that wasn't the state of chaos. In other words, there must be a flaw that the normal state of chaos didn't have. And this was where his hope lay. As long as he could seize the many loopholes that might exist before he completely perished, he would be able to turn this dangerous situation around, escape, and even break through this calamity. Chapter 21-27. After all, a tribulation was just a tribulation. It was not the wrath of the heavens, nor was it a fatal blow. The existence of such a tribulation was naturally to test the cultivators who had touched the rules, and to eliminate those who were not qualified. Therefore, such a tribulation naturally could not really throw Luo Fan into the chaotic state that only true saints and existences of the same level could exist. It was precisely because of this understanding that Luo Fan was so convinced in his heart that the grayish existence in front of him, which looked perfect and flawless in his eyes, could not really be perfect and flawless. There was only one reason why he felt that it was perfect and flawless. That was, his observation was not detailed enough, and his senses were not sharp enough, so he did not discover the existence of the flaws. With this mentality, he gradually calmed down. Even if his body and his concept of existence were constantly being eroded, assimilated, and worn down by the grayish state around him, he could no longer be moved. At this moment, he wholeheartedly sensed and experienced his surroundings, looking for the flaws that must exist around him. This grayish state was constructed by the fifth tribulation, and it was an unprecedented, deep simulation of the chaotic state. There was only one way to find the flaws of such an existence, and that was to compare it with the true chaotic state. Fortunately, ever since he could sense the chaotic state, Luo Fan had never given up on the idea of absorbing nutrients from the chaotic state, and through the various evolutions and changes of the chaotic state, he could obtain nutrients for his own cultivation. Therefore, although he could not see through the chaotic state due to his realm and knowledge, his familiarity with the chaotic state was not inferior to any other cultivator. As he sensed and distinguished carefully, All the mysteries of the chaotic state that he had seen, sensed, comprehended, and guessed for hundreds of millions of years continuously emerged from the depths of his memory. They constantly appeared and gradually compared with what he saw and sensed at this moment, and the simulated chaotic state in front of him. It was self-evident how deep the simulation was to be able to make Luo Fan feel as if he was really in the chaotic state. It was needless to say how difficult it was to find out what existed, what was not simulated properly, and what was different from the true state of chaos. In this simulated chaotic state, the space-time characteristics of the chaotic state were clearly simulated. In other words, his perception of time and space had been distorted here, and it had become a state of absolute chaos. At this moment, Luo Fan had completely lost his sense of time. Even the perception of time in his had disappeared due to the simulated chaotic state around him. Now, in order to measure time, the only thing he could do was to measure the degree to which his body was being eroded. It was only through this that he was able to sense the flow of time and roughly guess how much time had passed. He sensed that his body was disappearing bit by bit, being devoured by the murky chaos around him bit by bit, becoming a part of it. In turn, it began to corrode the parts of his body that were still intact, continuously corroding and assimilating more parts of his body, turning them into a part of him. This situation was simply like an ordinary person watching a blunt knife cutting his heart bit by bit, pushing him towards the abyss of death bit by bit. That kind of horror was self-evident. Of course, as mentioned before, this was not enough to make Luo Fan move at all, let alone make him feel fear. Then, after calculating the degree of his body being eroded and assimilated, Luo Fan waited for a few decades before finally grasping a subtle flaw. This subtle flaw was none other than the process of his body being eroded. He had once sent an incarnation into the chaotic state. Although there was a world of difference between his current strength and his strength back then, and they were not on the same level at all. However, the process of his incarnation being eroded and whittled away was also a revelation for him now. Back then, his incarnation did not even have time to feel any changes before it was completely erased by the chaotic state. Even the memories of the incarnation's existence were completely erased. Even now, he did not know how many times he had sent his incarnation into the chaotic state to be erased. But now, in the chaotic state simulated by the fifth Great Tribulation, he could clearly feel that the chaotic state was eroding, assimilating, and erasing his body and his concept of existence. He could even use this process to measure time. There was a huge difference between this and the true primal chaos state. This was obviously the difference between the simulated chaotic state and the true chaotic state, and it was also the flaw of the simulated chaotic state. After understanding this difference, for Luo Fan, it was equivalent to directly tearing open a door in a seamless sky and seeing a brand new world, a brand new heaven and earth. At this moment, he integrated all his senses into the process of this erosion and began to carefully experience the traces of the passage of time in this process. After speculating about the degree of erosion for decades, he finally barely grasped some subtle traces of space-time fluctuations. At this moment, his body had almost been completely obliterated, and the concept of his existence was only left with an extremely illusory silhouette. It seemed as if it would completely collapse in the next moment. Completely obliterated at this moment, an indescribable smile flashed in his heart. The fluctuations began to continuously magnify in his senses, and in the end, it filled his entire mind and occupied his entire world. Immediately after, he felt the erosion and assimilation effect of the simulated chaotic state stop instantly. It stopped outside of that fluctuation, outside of his body. With this change, his concept of existence began to rapidly recover. The concept of existence that was originally blurry, as if it would completely collapse in the next instant and disappear without a trace, had completely recovered to its peak state in just a short moment. In fact, because of some extremely strange space-time fluctuations on the surface, this concept of existence seemed to have become a bit stronger than its peak state, Corresponding to this concept of existence, his body in the real world started to reappear. Not long after, his body was reconstructed, and his body looked no different from how it was in the beginning. When everything recovered, Luo Fan looked at the simulated chaotic state again, but he already saw a completely different world. Looking at the surroundings through the fluctuations, it was no longer a large expanse of gray, but it turned into an extremely mysterious and strange world. It seemed to be a world that was randomly glued together by countless lights and shadows. It contained endless profound and unfathomable principles. At this moment, the world was constantly turbulent and constantly changing. All kinds of indescribable power were continuously released in this process, releasing towards the entire world and constantly affecting all existences that stepped into this world. This included Luo Fan, who was now enveloped by the strange space-time fluctuations. This is the fifth great calamity. When Luo Fan saw this scene, such a thought flashed through his mind. With this thought, he raised his head to look at the sky. Above the sky was a boundless void. It was deep and unfathomable, as if it hid infinite danger and contained infinite mysteries, as if it contained something in the world and the universe within it. There seemed to be some kind of gaze coming from the deepest part, enveloping the world that seemed to be randomly glued together by countless lights and shadows, including Luo Fan. What a powerful existence! At this moment, such a thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With this thought, cold sweat began to continuously seep out from the surface of his body, and it was gradually shredded by the surrounding fluctuations, turning into nothingness and disappearing without a trace. This gaze did not contain any power, nor did it have the powerful oppression that ordinary cultivators would have when they used their vision to oppress other living beings. It seemed to be a very calm and ordinary gaze that did not contain any emotions. However, it was this ordinary gaze that made Luo Fan feel an indescribable pressure from the depths of his heart. Moreover, this pressure became stronger and stronger as time passed, and as he was under that gaze for a longer period of time, faintly, he could even hear cracking sounds from the depths of his heart. At this moment, a figure slowly walked toward him from the depths of the sky. This figure was extremely illusory, as if it was just an extremely ordinary shadow. As it walked out from the depths of the void, its figure seemed to have completely merged with the surrounding darkness, forming a completely inseparable relationship. It was even difficult to distinguish whether it existed or not. However, Luo Fan could tell at a glance that the gaze that made him feel incomparably terrified came from that figure. As the figure continued to approach, its outline also became more and more distinct. Not long after, in less than the blink of an eye, that figure had already become an extremely distinct shadow. A real, indescribable shadow. When this primer stepped into this world, its body gradually appeared in strange colors. These strange colors were a strange scene formed by the random combination of various gorgeous colors. It looked very strange and terrifying. However, its colors resonated with the surrounding world and the light and shadows that filled the world, completely merging into one. Under this change, the figure simply looked like it was born from the surrounding world. It was like this world, the shadow of this world. This shadow did not have any aura, or even a physical body. With Luo Fan's current perception of the strength of cultivators, there was no title that could be applied to this shadow at all. It was like a non-existent figure that walked out from the void, only occasionally revealing some of its claws in the real world. At this moment, the shadow seemed to be extremely slow as it walked toward Luo Fan. However, in the blink of an eye, it had already traversed a distance of trillions of light years from the depths of the void to arrive in front of Luo Fan. The silhouette of this figure had the silhouette of a born Taoism aptitude, and its figure was even similar to Luo Fan's. After it appeared, it simply raised its hand and slapped at Luo Fan. This slap was slow, and there was almost no force behind it. As for the mysterious power or magic contained within it, there was not even the slightest hint of it. It looked like the most ordinary of palms, the most ordinary slap. However, This slap and the force behind it made Luo Fan feel an unimaginable sense of danger. The warning in his heart was constantly reminding him that he had to dodge this palm strike. Otherwise, he would lose his life here. He obviously did not doubt the warning in his heart at all. In fact, even if he did doubt the warning in his heart, he would not dare to take the risk and ignore everything at this moment. At this moment, he increased his heart power in a frenzy, and his power surged crazily. All his understanding and mastery of the nomological worldview began to erupt from the depths of his soul at this moment. As this eruption occurred, the fluctuations on his body began to distort, and a figure with a constantly changing face spread out from his body, covering his body like a suit of armor. Immediately after, an indescribable light was emitted from the armor-like figure, which was wrapped in the strange space-time fluctuations. It turned into a barrier that emitted an eternal and indestructible aura that pressed toward the illusory figure. This barrier was a type of defense. However, when it reached such a powerful level, its power was no longer limited to mere defense. Any existence that was hit by this barrier would definitely not be able to withstand its additional power as long as it could not withstand the eternal and indestructible aura of the barrier. In other words, under the impact of this barrier, it would definitely collapse and explode into pieces. This was also what Luo Fan was looking forward to now. He was looking forward to the figure suffering such a fate. Of course, this was just looking forward to. Luo Fan was actually quite clear that the possibility of such a method succeeding was basically negligible. Therefore, at this moment, the moment the barrier was pushed out, he made his move again. He suddenly raised his hand, and an extremely powerful light erupted from his hand. It began to stir the mottled and messy shadows around him, stirring them up and condensing them around the light, gradually forming a huge finger. After that, he pushed this finger without hesitation, followed the barrier, and blasted it toward the figure. All these actions sounded complicated, but the entire process actually did not take any time at all. With just a thought from Luo Fan, everything had already been completed, and he had directly sent it to the front of that figure. Facing the barrier, the figure's palm did not change at all. It was still neither fast nor slow, and it directly slapped the palm. Then, a change that even Luo Fan could not understand appeared on the palm. With the appearance of this inexplicable and indescribable change, the barrier that contained the charm of eternal indestructibility and indestructibility exploded with a loud bang, directly blasting the area formed by the overlapping light and shadows in the surroundings, turning it into an indescribable vacuum. After that, the palm did not change at all. It was still as ordinary as before, and even the many strange light and shadow blocks that were constantly swimming on it were still swimming at this moment. Be it the amplitude or the frequency, there was no change at all. It was as if the barrier that Luo Fan blasted out just now, which could overturn any perfect world and even directly change the world, did not exist at all. Faced with such a change, the warning signs in Luo Fan's heart rose to the peak. At this moment, a strange light and shadow that was covered by the surrounding fluctuations appeared around his body. This strange light and shadow formed a gray, absolute state of chaos. In this state, everything could be found and nothing could be determined. This was none other than the attack that Luo Fan had condensed with the help of the worldview and formed with the combination of every concept ability. This kind of attack could be said to have reached the limit that he could reach. It contained almost all the mysteries of the worldview, and it also contained all his cultivation achievements from the beginning of his cultivation until now. It could be said that this was already the sublimation of Luo Fan's cultivation in his entire life. However, at this moment, facing that figure, Luo Fan still did not feel much sense of security. At this moment, he let out a soft cry in his heart, and the chaotic light and shadow that seemed to be in a state of chaos frantically poured into the armor that seemed to have an ever-changing face on the surface of his body at this moment. As the chaotic light and shadow poured in, the originally ever-changing figure suddenly exploded. instantly turning into a gray, chaotic space that wrapped around Luo Fan's body. It began to churn continuously, constantly releasing all kinds of terrifying auras that could terrify the rulers on the third level. Chapter 21-28. After the layer of chaotic light fused with the ripples, it became even more chaotic. Vaguely, an indescribable connection was formed between it and the endless light in the surroundings. A subtle resonance appeared between the two. Under this resonance, there seemed to be some kind of power constantly communicating between the two, causing the chaotic light and shadow around Luo Fan's body to seemingly obtain some kind of sublimation. At this moment, the figure's palm had completely crushed Luo Fan's attack and slapped the chaotic light and shadow. At this moment, Luo Fan sensed that the palm was not just a palm, but a supreme and mysterious thing that he could not understand. When this object slapped onto the chaotic light silhouette, it instantly added an incomprehensible mystery to the light silhouette. Subsequently, the chaotic light silhouette gradually broke away from his control. Not only did it no longer have any effect on the shadow's palm, it even welcomed the palm and continued to approach Luo Fan's location. It turned out that all of Luo Fan's defenses and methods were completely useless in front of that shadow's palm strike. At this moment, no matter what ideas or methods Luo Fan had, it was already too late to use them. This was because the palm had already broken through the layers of defenses and was directly imprinted on his chest. As the palm entered, the armor-like artifact that was constantly changing between a spell and a magic treasure that covered his body like armor was completely useless. It was like a real shadow and was directly passed through by the shadow's palm. Crack! At this moment, Luo Fan felt that his body was collapsing, and his concept of existence was also collapsing. The collapsing body and the concept of existence were added with some kind of indescribable mystery. Under the effect of this mystery, all of his collapsed fragments did not disappear. Instead, they accompanied the mystery and shot in all directions, directly into the endless chaotic light and shadow, and completely integrated into it. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace. At this stage, only the colorful shadow was left in this area, quietly suspended in the midst of the chaotic light and shadow. Apart from this, all traces of Luo Fan's existence had disappeared without a trace. It was as if Luo Fan had never existed in this world. At this moment, the shadow seemed to have turned into a statue and was quietly suspended in the air. The various colored blocks on it squirmed and shifted slightly. This squirming and shifting didn't seem to have any pattern, as if it was just a random movement of absolute chaos. However, in fact, it seemed to contain the most profound and mysterious truth in the universe. This truth seemed to even surpass the true sage level. At this moment, the shadow suddenly trembled. During this tremble, its face began to gradually change. From the originally blurry outline that could not be seen, it gradually turned into a specific face. However, this face still cannot be seen clearly and could not be described. Anyone who saw this face would know what it looked like, but as long as they looked carefully, they would find that their previous impression was completely wrong. The specific face was not like what they had seen before. If they looked away, they would instantly find that they had completely forgotten everything they had seen and remembered when they had seen this face. "This is someone's sage tribulation?" the shadow murmured. Its voice was very mysterious. Every tone, every syllable, and every tone was like a chaotic divine thunder that could split the heavens and earth. It shook the simulated chaotic state and stirred it continuously, and an unknown number of space-times were born and destroyed in its voice. No, compared to the power of the sage tribulation, it is much weaker. That's right, it's a tribulation triggered by going against the flow of time. Immediately after, he denied his previous guess, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. Evidently, he had seen through the foundation of the fifth great tribulation in an instant. At this moment, countless light and shadows flashed in his eyes. There were countless worlds within them, and in each of those worlds, There was the image of a living being that was brighter than the other living beings' images. This person does indeed have the foundation to achieve Tao. I hope that you can become my friend in the future. The figure suddenly smiled. Immediately after, he blew lightly. In an instant, the completely chaotic, simulated chaotic state began to undergo some extremely subtle changes. Within these subtle changes, there was some sort of mystery that was added to the simulated chaotic state. This mystery had unbelievable power, enough to increase the power of the simulated chaotic state by several times. But at the same time, because of this mysterious existence, the flaw of the simulated chaos state had become even larger. It was much easier to grasp the flaw of the simulated chaos state than before. At this moment, an inexplicable sense of doubt appeared out of nowhere. I didn't break the rules. You used my shadow to impose the tribulation, and I took the initiative to help you now. Of course, this small matter of increasing the flaws is unavoidable. I'm not chaos after all, so it's understandable that my methods are weaker. The figure chuckled and said. As he said that, the doubt gradually disappeared. Immediately after, the surroundings returned to normal, and there was no difference from before. At this moment, the figure's eyes once again reflected the figures in the endless world, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Immediately after, the figure suddenly trembled and collapsed, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. This simulated chaotic state returned to the state that Luo Fan saw at the beginning. It was exactly the same as the chaotic state. However, compared to before, there seemed to be an additional mystery above this chaotic state. It was as mysterious as the supreme Tao in this simulated chaotic state. Under this mystery, the simulated chaotic state was indeed powerful, but there were already some traces that could be found as it operated. These traces that could be found were crucial clues for any living beings who wanted to understand the reality of this simulated chaotic state. If Luo Fan could see these traces, he would definitely be able to see through the reality of this simulated chaotic state at a speed that was reduced by 100 times compared to before. He might even have a chance to control this reality. Of course, on the other hand, due to the mysterious existence inside, if he was in this simulated chaotic state, the speed at which he was eroded and assimilated would definitely be many times faster than before. The damage he would suffer would also be many times more severe than before. After all, the power had increased. However, this drawback seemed so insignificant compared to the benefits. After all, whether it was the original power or the current power, for Luo Fan, it was a kind of power that was difficult to resist. Which of the two irresistible powers was stronger? The only difference between him being crushed into a few thousand pieces and being crushed into tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pieces was clearly the difference between them. Obviously, regardless of whether it was thousands of pieces or tens of thousands of pieces, they were all pieces. To him, it was just death. What was the difference in essence? Using this kind of drawback that had no difference in essence to obtain benefits that were more obvious was obviously a huge gain for Luo Fan. In other words, it was obvious that the existence of the true divine shadow was helping him from the side. Of course, the current Luo Fan obviously had no concept of all this. At this moment, he had completely lost all his senses. Even his concept of existence had been turned into billions of pieces that were scattered to various parts of the boundless simulated chaotic state. At this moment, his mind, his will, and his senses were divided into billions and trillions of parts, sinking into the mysterious place that simulated the state of chaos. It was as if he had stepped into billions and trillions of worlds to reincarnate and become a living being in that world. Among the countless living beings, almost all of them were left with their instincts. They did not have any memories of their original bodies, and they did not know who they were, what they wanted to pursue, or what their situation was like. They could only reincarnate in the world according to the rules of the world they were in. Only some of the insignificant parts could vaguely feel these things, and they vaguely knew that what they wanted to pursue was supreme transcendence. They knew that they were missing a huge part. Among them, in a certain world, The living being that Luo Fan reincarnated into suddenly had a flash of inspiration before he died, and he suddenly recalled a trace of complete memories. At Luo Fan's level, memories also had endless power. Just this trace of memory had already brazenly dispelled all the shackles and power that this world had attached to his body. All that was left was a trace of pure spiritual light that floated in the void. The heavenly disaster where he was originally standing was instantly frozen by the power of this wisp of memory. It was as if the entire world had been completely stopped at this moment. I'm Luo Fan. I'm going through the tribulation. An extremely weak and lost voice came from the spiritual light. Ever since Luo Fan had stepped foot into cultivation, the amount of time that he had experienced and the things that he had experienced had reached a level that any living being could not believe. This trace of memory naturally could not contain everything that he had experienced. At this moment, this memory only allowed him to understand his identity and what he was doing. As for everything else, his cultivation, his attainments in the Tao, his strength, and even the various divine abilities and profound techniques he'd comprehended in the past, and even his view of the world, they didn't exist at all. At this moment, a broken and strange shadow gradually appeared in the depths of the spiritual light. Like a stream of light, it started to wrap around the spiritual light. Under the cover of this shadow, the spiritual light was gradually nourished, and its originally pure state became even more profound. There were also traces of indestructible and inextinguishable auras being released from its body. The spiritual light that did not have a cultivation realm was at a loss at this moment. It did not know how it should deal with this world, nor did it know why it had become like this. To break this world, although it was only a very, very small part of Luo Fan, it was still Luo Fan. After all, its intelligence was not lacking, and it also had complete logical thinking. Therefore, this wisp of light quickly figured out what his ultimate goal was. After understanding this, it naturally knew what direction it should work towards. When one's cultivation reached a certain level, Luo Fan's every action, every thought, every breath, and every thought contained all sorts of inconceivable principles and contained endless, unimaginable mysteries. At this moment, the memories that Luo Fan had obtained were only strands, and there were no memories related to cultivation or cultivation realms. However, just the indescribable charm from those strands of memories was enough to guide this small portion of Luo Fan to step onto the path of cultivation. At this moment, the spiritual light trembled slightly, and strands of light were constantly separated, gradually weaving inside and outside of it. Looking at the way it was woven, although it was broken, it indeed contained some mysteries of the world of laws. At this moment, all sorts of indescribable truths appeared in the spiritual light's heart. These truths were mysterious and wonderful. Although it was only the first time he had comprehended them, it was as if he had comprehended them for millions of years. All sorts of wondrous uses of these truths and the various powers that they could unleash already existed in his heart. Under such circumstances, Lingguang's strength was increasing with every breath. His cultivation was also increasing. In just a few short breaths, the spiritual light had completely changed. It looked like it was woven from countless rays of light to form a Luo Fan, quietly floating under the shadow. Suddenly, a light flashed in Luo Fan's mind, and he suddenly comprehended some kind of key point. Under this key point, his body that was originally woven from light began to grow flesh and blood. Not long after, it had already turned into a real Luo Fan with a body of flesh and blood. So this is who I am. When the body was formed, the body slowly opened its mouth. There was an indescribable emotion in its eyes, as well as a subtle sense of realization. It was as if it had finally recognized itself at this moment. Only now did it know who it was. At this moment, the way it looked at the world before it had undergone an earth-shattering change. Although it was only through the subtle charm from the memories that he had stepped onto the path of cultivation, the current Luo Fan had already reached the Khanate Grand Luo realm in terms of cultivation realm alone. To ordinary living beings, this level was practically the highest goal that they pursued in their entire lives, and it was a supreme achievement that could only be achieved after spending countless years. However, to Luo Fan, this achievement was only the foundation of the foundation, the crudeness of the crudeness, so it was naturally extremely easy for him to step onto it. With the Khanate Grand Luo realm, Luo Fan could already split the world apart and be self-sufficient. On the other hand, the calamity that the world that he was originally in had only caused the entire world's laws to be overturned, causing the world to collapse. Such a calamity was clearly not difficult to deal with for a Khanate Grand Luo realm cultivator, especially under the circumstances that this world was only at the level of the Great Thousand World. It was even more so. At this moment, Luo Fan's heart jolted slightly. The shadow that enveloped his body shook slightly, and it had already split apart. It transformed into countless rays of light that pierced into the surrounding space and fused into the depths of the laws of this world. It started to connect with the numerous laws of the world and gradually gain control over them. After all, he was only a Khanate golden immortal. Even though he'd relied on his own comprehension and the might of an object that possessed the property of being indestructible and indestructible, Luo Fan had practically exhausted all of his energy to accomplish this. At this moment, his body was trembling slightly. As the power within his body surged, there was even an indescribable pain that surged incessantly throughout his body. It surged towards him ceaselessly and wanted to drown his mind. However, he was still Luo Fan, after all. Even if it was so painful and uncomfortable, he did not have any thoughts of giving up because of it. At this moment, under his mental command, the countless lines formed by the illusory figure trembled slightly, and they completely overturned all the laws in this entire world. At this moment, a powerful potential was transmitted to him through the lines of the shadow, and it instantly caused the shadow that enveloped his body to explode, causing the shadow to turn into smoke in the blink of an eye, and it kept rolling around his body. However, it was fortunate that the illusory figure had already exploded, and the energy from the explosion had spread out. By the time it reached his body, there was not even the slightest bit of it remaining. That was why his face was only slightly pale, and he did not completely collapse and die. At this moment, the entire world trembled slightly, and an extremely beautiful voice resounded throughout the world. This voice contained boundless joy, an indescribable joy. It was like a person who had come back from the dead and was expressing his joy to the entire world. Chapter 21-29. In a trance, he sensed that he seemed to have fused with the world. Various mysterious existences continuously surged towards him from the world, fusing into his body and mind, making him feel like he was gradually being filled up. Following this change, he felt that his eyes seemed to be able to vaguely see some blurry images outside this world. Outside this world, there was neither chaos nor void. Instead, there were endless worlds that seemed to be glued together like biological cells. Among these endless worlds, every single one of them was essentially the same as the one he was currently in. They were equally complete, equally profound, and equally filled with inconceivable mysteries. And from these many worlds, he could vaguely sense that there was a part of him in almost all of them. Transcend this world and gather all the parts that belong to me in all the worlds. At this moment, he had a clearer understanding of what he should do. It was no longer the kind of understanding that he could only think of based on his instincts and breaking through this world. This world was also extremely complete, but its structure and form were completely different from all the worlds that Luo Fan knew in his memories. The entire world seemed to be in a strange balance of movement and stillness. Whether it was originally moving or still, everything in this world had both characteristics of movement and stillness. Moreover, these two qualities were combined in an extremely mysterious way, forming an extremely mysterious and mystical whole. It was arranged in a world, filling the entire world, making the world incomparably lively, Even though this world had just turned around from the apocalypse, it was still extremely desolate. All the living beings in it had already disappeared, and there was no time for them to be reborn, so this vividness could not be changed. Faced with this situation, Luo Fan's heart moved slightly. His body shook, and the endless lines that had fused with the endless laws in this world rapidly shrank. In the blink of an eye, they had already condensed into a robe on the surface of his body, covering him. It looked like an extremely ordinary robe. After doing this, his heart moved slightly. He lifted his foot and took a light step forward. His figure broke through space and time, broke through the layers of laws, and directly stepped into the world. In reality, there was an extremely close connection between the world and the cognition of living beings. In other words, the existence of the world was closely related to the cognition of living beings. For example, in the unseen world, it didn't exist in the eyes of other cultivators. In that case, the other world and their cognition didn't exist. In the unseen world, although the great Tao still existed in their senses, it existed in a completely different state from what Luo Fan knew. In other words, to Luo Fan, the existence of the world was not actually limited by any situation in the world, but by Luo Fan's own cognition. Luo Fan believed that the world had an existence in the world, so the world would naturally have the ability to accept him. The great Tao would also directly appear in the world. The world was so mysterious. Just like at this moment, although the world where Luo Fan was in was unprecedentedly mysterious and strange in his cognition, such a world could still exist in the world. Then he could naturally come to the world of the world and directly see the source of all the laws of this world, the origin of all space-time, the source of all power, the source of everything, the source of everything, the source of everything, the great Tao. As for this essence, Luo Fan did not understand it until he stepped onto the road of Tao Master. His cultivation realm continued to improve, and his knowledge continued to grow. His current body only had a little insignificant memory of his original body, so he naturally did not know these various essences. However, although he did not know, the fundamental concept that had been deeply engraved in the origin of life would not disappear. Therefore, at this time, he would not be unable to enter the world of the world because he had completely lost those memories. Looking at the endless and all-encompassing great Tao in front of him, which seemed to contain all the principles of the universe, Luo Fan was slightly at a loss. This great Tao was incomparably mysterious, and the principles contained in it were so profound that even he yearned for it at first glance. However, it was a pity that there was an extremely stubborn and resolute will at the bottom of his heart that prevented him from fusing with it. It prevented him from directly receiving the principles and mysteries within it and fusing them into his body to strengthen his own cultivation. The attitude of that will toward the incomparably mysterious great Tao in front of him was faintly disdainful, as if some of the principles contained in this great Tao were so insignificant, at least to him, absolutely insignificant. Why is it like this? At this time, Luo Fan was a little at a loss. Fortunately, although he was only a part of Luo Fan, he was still Luo Fan after all. Although his past cultivation memories had all disappeared, the fundamental, true meaning of cultivation had not disappeared. At this moment, he looked into his body and began to inspect his entire body, his soul, and his life source. Through this inspection, he discovered a secret that he had not discovered when he had constructed his body. Although his body was slightly inferior to the great Tao before him as a whole, in a certain aspect, it seemed to be countless times more profound than the great Tao before him. Moreover, the existence that was more profound than the great Tao was extremely suitable for him. As soon as he sensed it, he felt indescribably comfortable and joyful. He could not help but want to pour his entire body and mind into it. So it's the law. At this moment, a thought flashed through his mind. With this thought, he looked at the great path in front of him again and discovered that the appearance of the great path in his eyes had completely changed. The various expressions that were originally extremely mysterious and contained a lot of information, began to transform into a unique existence. Laws. To Luo Fan, this was extremely familiar. He even felt that it was like his most fundamental and mysterious existence. It was like the most basic unit that constructed all the information, all the principles, and all the power in the great Tao. Everything, even everything else. With this change, he felt that his body seemed to have turned into a black hole that began to frantically absorb the structure of the law that was revealed in the great Tao. He even faintly constructed a unique outline in his heart. During this process, time gradually passed. After an unknown period of time, when a powerful repulsive force acted on Luo Fan's body, he realized that a humanoid outline had appeared in his heart. The human silhouette seemed to be formed by the accumulation of countless specks of light. It sat cross-legged in his heart, and as the specks of light moved about, it was as if the silhouette was constantly wriggling and changing its shape. Every inch of its muscles and skin seemed to be wriggling and moving about. It looked incredibly strange and mystical. So this is a false saint. Sensing the changes in his body, Luo Fan felt an indescribable sense of loss, but also an inexplicable sense of joy. Currently, his cultivation realm was already hundreds of millions of times stronger than when he had just taken form, when he was a Khanate Zenith Heaven. At this moment, he had even formed a powerful pressure on the Great Tao, causing the operation of the Great Tao to faintly become chaotic. This chaos flowed out of the Great Tao and poured into the surface space-time, causing it to undergo a shocking change. The entire space-time began to fluctuate violently. Under the intense tremors, the shape of the entire space-time began to change. There was chaos everywhere, and there were changes everywhere. The changes were not much different from the doomsday that this world had encountered back then. With this change, it was no wonder that this world would reject Luo Fan's existence. It's a pity that I'm not the false saint of this world, but my own false saint. Otherwise, I would be able to dominate this world. Luo Fan sighed, and an inexplicable sense of helplessness appeared on his face. He felt that the great Tao in front of him still had a great significance to him. He could still absorb a large amount of nourishment from the great Tao, allowing him to continue growing. It was precisely because of this that he was unwilling to leave this world at this moment. It was a pity that although he had already become a false saint, what he had achieved was not the false saint of this world. In other words, he did not fuse with this world, and he did not rely on the power of this world to cross the layers of realms and step into the false saint realm. Instead, he relied on his own strength, his own comprehension, and his own body as the foundation to step into the false saint realm. If there was a way to become a false saint in the past, then he would be the strongest ruler of this world. In this world, he would be the supreme saint, and he would almost have all the power of a true saint. As long as the world was not destroyed, he would be indestructible. However, it was obvious that with Luo Fan's method of becoming a false saint, it was impossible for him to have such convenience. In this way, his presence in this world had already started to impact the world itself, causing the existence of this world to be affected. In other words, just as existence alone had caused the world to tremble, vaguely causing the world to be in danger of collapsing. In this way, it would be strange if the world did not reject him. Although he knew that this world was only a world born from the fifth calamity, it was still a world that he was born in after all. After all, it was a world that had given him so many benefits. In the end, Luo Fan was not heartless enough to destroy this world easily. Thus, at this moment, he sighed and stopped comprehending the Grand Tao. With a thought in his heart, he went along with the world's repulsive force towards him, and his body shook before he was sent out of this world and appeared in between the barriers of that world. The barrier of this world was none other than the layer of invisible existence between the countless worlds that were glued together like cells. This layer of invisible existence separated the many worlds, preventing them from merging into one. This barrier had no direction, no size, and even no time. In it, it was like a mosquito that had fallen into amber. Even his body, mind, and what were about to be completely frozen, and he could not control himself. Fortunately, Luo Fan was already a fall saint, but he was no longer an ordinary cultivator. Even when he entered this barrier, various space-times naturally appeared around him and naturally accommodated his existence. This method sounded amazing, but it wasn't even worth mentioning when it was explained. After all, this barrier itself was a barrier that isolated the many worlds. In other words, it was impossible for the worlds to fuse with the barrier. In this way, rushing into the worlds through the barrier was equivalent to adding bricks and tiles to the entire barrier world system, adding some worlds to the barrier world system. In other words, the spacetimes that Luo Fan had created were essentially no different from the world he had been in before in the entire barrier world system. After creating these spacetimes, Luo Fan directly sat between those worlds and began to close his eyes. He spread his senses out and followed the senses between the worlds to spread to the many worlds. The world he had been in previously could not accommodate his existence and directly expelled him. The many worlds that were connected to that world were similar in nature and level to that world, so their tolerance for him was obviously not much stronger. Under such circumstances, if he entered them, the greatest possibility was that he would definitely be rejected by those worlds. He naturally had a way to deal with the rejection. However, that was equivalent to going against a world. If it was 1 or 2 worlds, he could naturally accept it. However, at this moment, he looked over and saw that the number of worlds around him was calculated in the billions. Resisting the rejection of so many worlds again and entering them to fuse with a part of himself was definitely not a pleasant thing. Therefore, at this moment, when he realized that the space-time he had opened could also fuse with the barrier world system, he instantly made a decision to directly use the connection between these newly created worlds and the many barrier worlds to achieve his goal. After integrating his senses into the worlds, Luo Fan instantly sensed the experiences of countless parts of himself in the many worlds. Compared to him being able to awaken, the experiences of the other parts of his body were not so lucky. Even the luckiest of those body parts had reincarnated dozens of times in the many worlds. The unluckier ones had even reincarnated tens of thousands of times. Even now, who knew how many body parts of himself were dying time and time again? How pitiful! Luo Fan sighed. His senses surged, and his power was stimulated. Like fishing, he fished out his body parts from the many worlds. Of course, what he was targeting now was naturally those body parts that were dying, where everything they had in that world was disappearing, and where a bit of their spirit light was leaving their body. After all, such existences had already lost their body structure, and the restraining force of that world had reached the lowest level. Compared to body parts from other worlds, the difficulty of fishing them out was much easier. During this process, bits of spirit light constantly flickered from the many worlds and quickly entered the space-time that Luo Fan had opened at this moment through the connection between the worlds, continuously fusing with his body, with every bit of spirit light fusing with him. Luo Fan felt strands of memories continuously appear in his heart. In a trance, he felt that he had regained many of the insights that he had lost. As these bits of memories enriched him, his cultivation realm also involuntarily increased. In just a few short years, he had already stepped from the false saint realm to the despair realm. As his cultivation realm increased, his sense of existence became even greater, and the pressure on the surrounding space-time also became much stronger than before. Unknowingly, the membrane that he was in had already expanded to more than thousands of times its original size. Under this change, the surrounding worlds were constantly pushed away, making this place seem like a bright moon in a sky, full of stars. The entire membrane world was not unchanging. In fact, the entire membrane world could be said to be undergoing some kind of subtle movement at all times. It was difficult to determine the pattern of this subtle movement. There seemed to be no pattern at all, but there seemed to be an incomparably mysterious pattern in it. As Luo Fan grew, his weight gradually suppressed more and more worlds. Gradually, it affected the operation of the membrane world system. gradually changing the movement trajectory of the surrounding worlds. Vaguely, he became the rotation axis of more and more worlds, making more and more worlds begin to circulate around him. Although he had already pushed his cultivation to the level of the Desperateur and was many times stronger than before, it was still not enough to stop him. However, the body parts that Luo Fan found now were only a small part that was not worth mentioning. To say that it was a drop in the ocean would be an exaggeration of the weight of the body parts that he found. Under such circumstances, it could be imagined that the process of Luo Fan's weight continuously increasing would definitely last for a very long time. Chapter 2130. Time continued to pass in Luo Fan's senses. At every moment, endless memories seeped into his heart and fused with him, allowing him to comprehend who knew how much he had cultivated and the various cultivation principles he knew. Originally, he only had an outline in his heart, and most of it was empty, but now it was gradually being filled up and made up for. With this change, Luo Fan gradually understood. So this was his view of the world. This was his view of the world. After understanding this, his cultivation speed became faster and faster, and the extent of his improvement also became greater and greater. In a trance, the speed at which he pulled his body parts from the many worlds around him became even faster. He did not know how much time passed like this. It seemed like millions of years, but it also seemed like just a few short years. At a certain moment, Luo Fan suddenly found that he no longer had any body parts to collect and no memories to awaken. This situation suddenly brought him back from the absolute enjoyment. He opened his eyes and looked around, and there was an inexplicable sense of loss. He clearly felt that there were still many gaps in his memory. There were still patches of blankness, and his cultivation realm had only increased to the level of a calamity expert. This clearly meant that he was not complete. It meant that a large portion of his body parts and a large portion of his memories had not returned. But now, he felt that there were no longer any body parts that belonged to him in the endless worlds around him. All the worlds were clean, and all the body parts that belonged to him had been collected by him. This kind of contradiction made him feel inexplicably surprised at this moment, and a look of bewilderment appeared on his face. Why is it like this? Where are the other parts? He muttered as his senses swept out in all directions, searching for the other parts of his body that might still exist. After searching for who knew how long, at a certain moment, he suddenly encountered an incomparably familiar sense. This sense was boundless and extremely profound, and in terms of realm, it felt like it complemented his. So that's how it is. In an instant, Luo Fan understood what was going on. The perception he came into contact with was none other than the individual perception condensed from other parts of his body. In other words, in addition to him constantly gathering body parts and condensing them into a whole, there was another body part that was gathering body parts in another place that was outside of his range of perception. It was even outside of his range of knowledge. It was also gathering body parts in order to condense a complete Luo Fan. The reason why he didn't sense or discover their existence was very simple. That was because those areas were beyond his knowledge. They were in areas that he didn't think existed at all. Do you want me to fight with every part of my body? At this time, Luo Fan smiled bitterly. After the many body parts were separated and reunited, they had already become different individuals. Once these different individuals fused, they would naturally become the real Luo Fan. However, before they truly fused, they were just parts that belonged to Luo Fan. It was like all the cells in a person's body. In fact, all the cells were actually tiny creatures. If they were separated, they could actually be regarded as independent creatures. However, the cells of ordinary creatures were too weak and couldn't be self-sufficient. Once they were separated, they would only die. Therefore, there wasn't anything special about it just now. However, for an existence at Luo Fan's level, his power had already connected every detail of his body and completed every smallest area of his body. In this way, even the smallest detail of his body, even if it was originally impossible for other creatures to separate, be independent, or even exist completely, had obtained the ability to be self-sufficient. Therefore, they could become independent on their own. In this way, the current Luo fan could be said to be Luo fan, but more accurately, it should be the condensed will of a part of Luo fan. This is fate. At this moment, an indescribable sigh appeared on Luo fan's face. Originally, it was not difficult for Luo fan to completely condense his body parts, but for him, it was not difficult at all. After all, no matter how many worlds and space-times there were, as long as one could be condensed with enough time, one would naturally be able to condense all the body parts into one. In the end, all the body parts would be condensed into one, and the complete Luo fan would be condensed. However, if different body parts were condensing Luo fan, the situation would become billions of times more complicated. This was because each of them was Luo fan, and each of them could be said to not be Luo fan. If only one body part had a clear memory, he would naturally be the absolute main body. In the end, all the bodies and all the body parts would naturally be him, and he was willing to condense bit by bit like this. However, once different body parts were condensing, it would be different. This was because different body parts would condense different wills. They all belonged to Luo fan, but they each had their own independent wills. These wills were willing to develop themselves into the real Luo fan and condense all the body parts, but they were not willing to become a part of other wills or become resources for other wills to form a complete Luo fan. In other words, for them to condense themselves into Luo fan, it was just their own growth. Although the final Luo fan would be different from them now, it would only be similar to the will of an adult and the will of an infant. On the other hand, becoming a part of another's will and merging with another's will was equivalent to giving up on oneself and becoming a part of one's brother, allowing one's brother to grow to a higher level. That feeling was obviously completely different. In this way, it could be expected that the battle between the many body parts would definitely occur. Moreover, this battle would be incomparably tragic, so much so that even the existence of billions of worlds would not be able to contain it. It would result in an incomparably terrifying result, and even completely destroy everything created by the fifth great calamity. In the end, everything about him would be completely destroyed. All of these people were a part of Luo fan. Their mentality and wills were actually similar to Luo fans. And Luo fan was obviously not the kind of existence that was willing to completely abandon himself and sacrifice himself for others, even if those others were originally one with him. In this way, the outcome of their battle could almost be predicted. It was impossible for any part of his body to give up on itself. This kind of fusion would naturally take forever. In the end, it was even possible that they would all perish together. All parts of his body would perish in battle, causing Luo fan's own fundamental existence to perish in this process. It was as if Luo fan had never existed in the first place. This, perhaps, was the true difficulty of the fifth great calamity. Compared to constructing a similar Luo fan to fight against him in the past, this situation seemed even simpler, but in reality, it was many times more difficult than before. In the past, it could be considered a battle between Luo fan and himself, but in the end, it was still a battle against another existence that was similar to himself. It was equivalent to a battle against his own shadow. But now, it was a true battle between himself and himself. At this moment, the perception on the other side trembled violently. For a while, an indescribable sense of hostility spread out from that perception. Since he sensed the existence of the same body parts on the other side, Luo fan naturally recognized the existence on the other side that was beyond his understanding. Naturally, that situation became part of his own understanding. In the blink of an eye, he felt his senses suddenly expand and a boundless void appeared before his eyes. In that boundless void, there were countless worlds. These worlds existed in the form of the void, and they were like dark spots in the void that covered the void. And in the center of the void, there was a figure sitting cross-legged. The countless dark spots in the void were like the airflow around this figure, constantly revolving around this figure in a cycle. This figure's appearance was none other than Luo fan's appearance. Looking at this figure, Luo Fan felt like he was looking at a mirror. That figure was extremely similar to him, and the space-time structure in that void was also extremely similar to the space-time structure where he was now. At this moment, the space-time membrane was also being pulled and revolved around him, moving in a circle. At this moment, there was only an indescribable expression on Luo Fan's face, and there was an indescribable helplessness on his face. I didn't expect it to be this kind of calamity. He sighed. With this sigh, his perception spread out, and he started to continuously adjust his perception. This ability to adjust one's perception was something that only an existence like him, who had condensed the embryonic form of a worldview, could do. After all, this method of adjusting one's perception out of thin air was simply subverting one's own power time and time again, subverting one's perception of the world. If it was an ordinary person, they would need to exhaust all of their mental energy every time they made an adjustment, and they would need to struggle in their heart countless times before they could finally complete the adjustment. In the process, they would even have to risk their perception collapsing and turning into a lunatic. Only an existence like Luo Fan, who had already condensed the worldview and could even condense his perception into something substantial, could easily change his perception and perception. He could quickly establish something that he originally thought could not exist in his heart. As he adjusted his perception, the world in front of him started to expand. One after another, different clusters of worlds entered his perception. In a trance, he felt that the membrane world system that he originally thought was everything was just an extremely ordinary one among the many worlds. Compared to the infinite worlds, the proportion it occupied was extremely insignificant. Among the many worlds, there were all kinds of worlds. There were worlds that were like voids, worlds that were like membranes, worlds that were condensed from extremely dense solid matter, worlds that were like liquid that flowed endlessly and even constantly changed forms. There were worlds that were sometimes solid, sometimes liquid, and sometimes gas. There were all kinds of them, and there were all kinds of them. The number was many times more than what he had imagined. Moreover, this was only what he discovered after he changed his perception. If his perception did not even change, there was no need to mention how many worlds there were. Faced with such changes, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. As his perception swept across the many worlds, there were senses that came into contact with almost all of them. Naturally, a strange hostility was emitted from those worlds. These were the worlds where Luo Fan's body parts had stood out and gathered enough body parts to obtain independent, complete wills. As for the others, there was still no reaction. Either none of the body parts in those worlds had awakened, or the Luo Fan in those worlds did not have enough power to gather all of his body parts. Because everyone here could be said to be Luo Fan, their way of thinking and strength were extremely similar. Therefore, the speed at which they discovered each other was not much different, and the thoughts they had after discovering each other were not much different. Therefore, at this moment, the knowledge of all Luo Fans was like a big explosion, growing at a crazy rate. And as their senses came into contact and influenced each other, in turn promoted each other's knowledge. In the end, they saw more and more worlds and heaven and earth groups. Just like that, in just a few years, the final number of worlds had increased to an unimaginable level. Devouring was naturally born in this process. Of course, the target of any Luo Fan to devour would naturally not be the Luo Fan that also had independent wills. Their targets of devouring were worlds that did not have any independent will. As for the distance between the worlds, it went without saying. As long as they changed their perception, those worlds would naturally be adjacent to the many worlds. Therefore, this distance was meaningless to Luo Fans. Many wills were competing among the worlds, constantly absorbing, fusing, and strengthening themselves. Under such circumstances, in just a few years, the worlds that did not have independent wills had completely disappeared, leaving only the worlds that had independent wills that still had Luo Fans. At this point, the many Luo Fans began to confront each other. They were all split from the same individual, their views and way of thinking were very similar, and they all knew this. Under such circumstances, they naturally understood what they had to do to benefit the whole and themselves. This confrontation was obviously going to continue for a long time. At least, it would be like this until they sensed that the fifth great calamity could not be withstood, unless something unexpected happened. The Luo fan in the membrane world system had also devoured many of the body parts of Luo fan's blank worlds over the years. Moreover, compared to the majority of Luo fans, the number he had devoured was not small. After all, no matter what, he was the first Luo fan to discover the existence of other worlds. The number of world clusters that he knew was definitely the longest among all of them. Under such circumstances, it was natural for him to change his perception, bring his world closer to another world, and finally devour the body parts of Luo fan's body in those worlds, or rather, fuse with the body parts. Of course, this kind of devouring or fusion wasn't always smooth sailing. In fact, along the way, he had competed with quite a number of Luo fans. In this competition, he won and lost. Some directly took most of the body parts, while others only took a little bit. Giving up on myself for the sake of the whole, I still can't do such a thing. On this day, Luo fan let out a long sigh, and there was some inexplicable regret on his face. What he could not do, the other Luo fans could not do either. This also made him see the almost inevitable tragic outcome of the fifth great calamity. After thinking for a long time and feeling regretful for a long time, he finally suppressed his emotions and pushed all kinds of distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. If the outcome could not be changed, so what if he considered more? If he continued to think about it now, he would only be looking for trouble. In any case, even if he could not survive the fifth great calamity in the end, to him, as long as his life before that was exciting enough, it would not be considered a total loss. But why does the structure of these worlds feel a little familiar? After suppressing all the distracting thoughts, he suddenly had this doubt in his mind. Chapter 21:31. The existence that was extremely similar to the structure of the many worlds was none other than the third level of the Tao Master's Path. In the third level of the Tao Master's Path, every substance contained an extremely large number of almost perfect worlds. Obviously, there was a group of worlds in every substance. A group of worlds, due to the difference in the substance, the structure and the way of existence of the world group would also change accordingly. The groups of worlds in the water, the groups of worlds in the air, the groups of worlds in the pneuma, the groups of worlds in the stone, and the groups of worlds in the living things all had their own characteristics and mysteries. Moreover, it seemed that the structure of the groups of worlds in Luo fan's eyes was very similar. However, he was now inside the groups of worlds in the substance, while he was outside the numerous substances in the past, looking down at the countless groups of worlds. It was precisely because of the different perspectives that it took him so long to realize the similarities between the two and to think of the connection between the two. So, it's like this. Could it be that this tribulation is simulating the third level of the Tao Master's Path? At this time, such a shocking thought flashed across Luo fan's mind. With this thought, countless lights flashed in his mind, and the sparks of his thoughts almost connected to form a sea of fire. All kinds of possibilities and doubts constantly appeared in his mind. In the end, the scene that he had seen when he had just stepped into the fifth tribulation appeared in his eyes. That boundless, hazy, simulated state of chaos occupied his mind. His eyes, ears, and senses were all left with that simulated state of chaos from back then. That is not a simulation of the third level of the Tao Master's Path, but a simulation of the state of chaos. In other words, not only is this place simulating the state of chaos, but even the third level of the Tao Master's Path is actually simulating the state of chaos. Such a thought made Luo fan's body tremble uncontrollably. A joy of grasping the only bit of truth in the boundless fog emerged from the bottom of his heart, and his mood suddenly became inexplicably excited. The state of chaos was a kind of existence that he could not completely understand. This kind of existence was all-encompassing. How many faces and how many levels did it have? Even the current him had no idea. In fact, he might never be able to figure it out. For the current him, the level of existence in the state of chaos was the vast transportation network built by many true sages or even beings above true sages that could communicate with many great worlds and perfect worlds. Apart from that, there was a universe of negative emotions that permeated the entire state of chaos, or at least within the scope of his understanding. This existence formed an extremely miraculous connection with the transportation network, as if it was beneath the transportation network. Apart from that, there seemed to be a universe of positive emotions superimposed on it. There was also the wonderful world that he had seen in the memories of that chaos creature. Just like that, level by level, no matter what level he reached, no matter how deep his understanding of the chaos was, he would always find that the chaos that he knew was still vaster and more real. His understanding was still just a small, insignificant part of it. And obviously, the scene created by the third level of the road to Down Master, or rather, the scene created by the fifth tribulation, coincided with the true appearance of the state of chaos. That was to say, if there really existed such a wonderful world and such a wonderful space-time, then it could only be a certain level of the state of chaos. At least, in Luo Fan's understanding, this was the only possibility, so it's the chaos. After understanding this, Luo Fan felt that his perspective began to improve crazily, and he began to constantly surpass it. In his eyes, the world clusters began to increase as his perspective continued to improve, one after another, piece after piece. Among those newly added world clusters, some had parts of Luo Fan's body integrated into them, while some were completely blank, just existing, completely unrelated to him. Some of them had the same Luo Fan, collecting parts of Luo Fan's body, while some were still in chaos, and none of them could gain the upper hand in the end and become independent. Such changes continued. At a certain moment, he seemed to break through a certain boundary, and suddenly everything became clear. A boundless, mysterious, and even full of vitality came into his eyes. Looking down below, there was an island that was insignificant compared to the whole world, and could even be called an island that was like a speck of dust. Looking up, around the island, there was a boundless ocean. In the distance, there was a black line from the left of the world to the right of the world, as if it had completely divided the whole world into two parts. That was obviously the main continent of the world. It's just an island. I thought this was the whole of the world. At that moment, Luo Fan sighed inwardly, and a strange sense of melancholy rose from the bottom of his heart. At that moment, he frowned and realized that many senses and gazes had risen to the same level as him. They began to see the scenery in his eyes, and the truth of the countless world clusters below. Among these gazes and senses, Luo Fan could sense an extremely familiar feeling. It was the feeling of another Luo Fan. Clearly, although not all of them, most of the Luo Fan with independent were like him. They had thought of the truth that he had comprehended before, and their vision had risen. In the end, they arrived at the real world and saw the scenery in front of them clearly. At that moment, Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. This is a good chance. Immediately, his body stepped out of the membrane group of worlds without any hesitation, and he began to rise in the direction that his vision had risen, continuously surpassing the void. At that moment, the membrane group of worlds seemed to be pulled by a huge force, and it began to collapse and shrink towards him. When he completely surpassed the membrane group of worlds, the entire membrane group of worlds had shrunk to the size of a small dot, and it had completely fused with his body. As he fused with the membrane world group, his body grew immeasurably. Finally, he became a colossal existence in the eyes of the other living beings in the other membrane world group. The speed at which he ascended became increasingly faster. As he rose to this level, the suction force on his body became even stronger, and it produced an even more powerful force. It also formed a powerful pull on the surrounding worlds, causing several dozen world clusters to be pulled by him. Like the membrane group of worlds from before, they began to shrink rapidly, and they gradually fused with his body. This change instantly stirred up a large area of the world cluster of worlds into chaos. In a short period of time, similar changes appeared in many unknowns. Luo Fan rushed into the sky, uplifting himself, wanting to devour his own world clusters, strengthen himself, transcend the restrictions of these world clusters, truly uplifting into the true world. However, it was a pity that the importance of sequence was completely shown at this moment. The first to realize this and react was the Luo Fan of the membrane group of worlds. As such, when the other Luo Fan took action, he had already surpassed the other Luo Fan by several levels. In other words, while the other Luo Fan were still eyeing the worlds that they had grown up in, this Luo Fan had already started to devour and fuse with hundreds and thousands of worlds. In this way, the result was obvious. This Luo Fan was constantly changing his knowledge, shifting the many worlds that had already reacted to his surroundings through the changes in his knowledge, and immediately devouring and fusing them into his body. As he made this choice, more and more Luo Fan with independent will fused into his body, and the memories they possessed were gradually obtained by Luo Fan. As his memories recovered, the principles and mysteries he had comprehended in the past began to fill in. With that, Luo Fan's attainment began to rise by leaps and bounds. Moreover, at a glance, he was already Luo Fan of the highest level. None of the other independent wills could compare to him. As expected, at this level, what matters in battle is one's perception. At this moment, Luo Fan gained an unprecedented deep understanding of his past understanding of cultivation. At the lower end of cultivation, it was a battle of talent and aptitude. At the middle end, it was a battle of comprehension and Tao heart. But at the higher end, such as the false saint level, it was a battle of perception. This could already be seen from the many perception theurgy performed by the Tao Lord's disciples. After all, the foundation of perception theurgy was in perception. Without a powerful perception, no matter how powerful the theurgy was, it would only be a silver spear. However, at this moment, by quickly understanding the truth of the countless worlds in front of him, he stood out and surpassed the other Luo Fan. In the end, it was very likely that he would be the one to complete Luo Fan and grow into the real Luo Fan. This made him truly understand how important this perception was. The other Luo Fan were also Luo Fan. They also had the thoughts of Luo Fan, the cultivation realm of Luo Fan, and his perception. As such, it was naturally impossible for them to willingly give up on themselves and directly integrate into the bodies of other Luo Fan to become a complete part of Luo Fan. Therefore, during this process, they erupted with a world-shaking resistance. The world was destroyed, and the clusters of worlds collapsed. All sorts of changes that were so terrifying that ordinary cultivators could not bear to watch happened almost every single moment during this process. However, as mentioned before, there were also Luo Fan, and their way of thinking was also Luo Fan's way of thinking. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan, who had already grown to an extremely high level, could naturally guess their thoughts and understand their methods. In this way, under the pressure of a stronger power and a higher realm, the outcome of the resistance was already imaginable. No one knew how long the change lasted. It seemed to have been tens of millions of years, but it also seemed to have only been a few days. When Luo Fan finally returned to his senses, he realized that he had become a complete Luo Fan. Everything that was different from Luo Fan's memories, different from Luo Fan's pain, and different from Luo Fan's thoughts were all merged into one. He was the true Luo Fan. What a tribulation. I almost couldn't make it back. Even though he had merged back into one, Luo Fan could not help but feel a lingering fear. Although the process of passing through the tribulation seemed relatively simple, one of them had obtained the truth of the world at the first moment, and then stood out and began to fuse with the other world groups, finally completing the fusion of all independent wills of Luo Fan. However, all of this was so coincidental that he did not dare to hope that it would happen again. After all, While the enlightenment that Luo Fan obtained seemed to be natural, it was in fact a little strange. The situation of the many world groups was so mysterious, and there could have been many possibilities. However, among those possibilities, that Luo Fan had grasped the only correct possibility, and in the end he stood out and surpassed the other Luo Fans and began to fuse with them. It was to the extent that the other Luo Fans were able to obtain the same comprehension because of his existence, his guidance. If not for that, the advantage that Luo Fan had would not have been so great. There seems to be some mystery guiding that me. At this moment, as he recalled, Luo Fan noticed many things that he had not noticed before, and he faintly understood. The appearance of this situation was so coincidental, so perfect, but it meant that there was definitely some power guiding him in a way that he could not understand. Who is it? Many thoughts gathered at this moment, and this was a question. That mystery definitely had a master. As for who that master was and why he was doing this, he could not understand it all. With a slight thought, he looked around and saw a faintly discernible mysterious existence hidden in the sky. When he carefully sensed it, that mysterious existence disappeared without a trace in a flash, as if it had never existed. What a pity. Looks like I still can't discover that mystery. He sighed and retracted his gaze. He lowered his head and saw that the island below had completely collapsed. A large part of the island above the sea had been completely cut off, and only ruins that seemed to have been gnawed on by some wild beast were left. As for all the matter within, it had already fused with Luo Fan's body. Or, to be more precise, the matter that the island had lost had already been refined by Luo Fan through his own extraordinary methods, and finally turned into this Luo Fan who was floating in the void and looking into the distance. After all, Luo Fan's body actually existed in a certain space-time within that matter. Such an existence did not exist in this world at all. Under such circumstances, if he wanted to leave those worlds and appear in this world, what he had to do was naturally to recondense a body that could be accepted by this world. Only with this body would he be able to descend to this world and transcend the numerous worlds. In other words, he seemed to be constantly transcending himself and breaking away from the various worlds. In fact, his technique was, in a fundamental sense, constantly refining bodies that had transcended the layers of worlds. In the end, he had finally formed a true body. That was why he was able to stand in the sky and look down on everything in this world. At this moment, layers of ripples appeared in the void. As the ripples spread, a large hand appeared in the void and brazenly grabbed towards him. The large hand looked fair and delicate, and it was indescribably beautiful. But at this time, the giant hand descended from the sky with a destructive momentum, fiercely falling towards Luo Fan. Faced with such a large hand, Luo Fan's heart trembled. There was no time for him to do anything else, and he instinctively took action. He suddenly raised his hand, and a ray of light shot out from his hand. It condensed into a sharp sword in the void, and with a brazen charge, it had already transcended space-time and arrived before the large hand. It stabbed into the palm. This ray of light was none other than a concept ability. However, the concept contained within the concept ability was a sharp concept. In other words, it was a concept that described and defined sharpness. The large hand clearly didn't expect Luo Fan to react so quickly and counterattack so forcefully. It didn't even have time to react before the sword stabbed into the palm and emerged from the back of the hand. Then, the sword trembled slightly, and the large hand was instantly sliced into countless pieces. It turned into a puff of smoke in an instant. As the sword swept through it, the smoke dispersed in the blink of an eye, gradually fusing with the ocean below and disappearing without a trace. At this moment, a groan rang out in the distance. This moan was extremely delicate and pleasant to the ears. Just from the sound alone, one could tell that this was definitely an extremely beautiful woman. Chapter 2132. At that moment, the woman's brows were slightly furrowed, as if a sliver of pain was spreading between her brows. And it was this trace of pain that had already caused the surrounding laws to undergo subtle changes, causing the infinite space-time hidden between the void to undergo various earth-shattering changes. As a result of these earth-shattering changes, the surrounding space-time seemed to become dim, and the lingering pain began to spread in all directions, causing any existence that sensed the changes in this area to naturally feel an inexplicable pain. Of course, all of this was only for ordinary living beings. For Luo Fan, these changes were not enough to make his heart flutter at all. At this moment, there was only an inexplicable displeasure in his heart. No matter who it was, they would be displeased to be attacked for no reason. It was the same even if the one who attacked him was a beautiful woman who could change the laws of heaven and earth with just her appearance alone. At this moment, his heart trembled slightly, and the divine power formed by the sharp concept shook slightly before condensing again. Then, it directly broke through the space-time and rushed straight towards the space-time where the woman was. The world itself was even more advanced than the space-time on the third level of the Tao Master's Road. Whether it was the strength or the complexity of the space-time, it had reached an extremely shocking level. If Luo Fan had not cultivated in the third level of the Tao Master's Road for such a long time, and even broken through all the shackles of the third level, it would have been impossible for him to break through the space-time of this world so easily, and it was even possible that he would not have any extraordinary ability. At this moment, there was a trace of anger in the woman's eyes. "You actually dare to attack?" She spat out such a sentence. The power of this sentence was no less than that of her appearance, and it also changed the surrounding laws and principles, as well as the countless space-time around. It caused the space-time and laws that originally contained pain to gradually turn into a kind of angry laws in space-time. Immediately afterward, she didn't seem to make any movements, but an incomparably mysterious power had already condensed and directly blasted at Luo Fan's sharp concept divine ability. Crack! An earth-shattering roar broke out at this moment. At the point of contact, the surrounding space seemed to be instantly devoured and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, a strange scene that should have never appeared in this world had appeared in the surroundings. There was no world cluster, no space-time, not even laws. On the other hand, the concept divine ability that Luo Fan had released had completely collapsed and disappeared without a trace. The entire process was mysterious and had completely exceeded the scope of his understanding. He could not help but feel terrified. What kind of technique is this? He was shocked as this thought flashed through his mind. For what he could sense, the technique that the woman was using was faintly as mysterious as the one he saw when he raised his head to look at the sky. However, there was a fundamental difference in terms of level. It was as if that mysterious technique had been simplified thousands or tens of thousands of times. Of course, they were all mysterious, and they were all existences that he could not understand. At this moment, his evaluation was obviously only a rough one, and he had no way of knowing exactly what the truth was. When this thought emerged in his mind, he felt an indescribable sense of hope. This is the best place to start. This was what he thought at this moment. When Luo Fan discovered that completely incomprehensible, aloof, overlooking and shrouding mystery, he knew in his heart that if he wanted to break through the fifth great tribulation, he would have to do something on top of that mystery. No matter how he dealt with the mystery, it was necessary to understand it in order to get through the fifth tribulation. Obviously, with his current level, it was a little too ambitious for him to directly understand the supreme mystery that shrouded the world. The leap was too great. Under such circumstances, the mysterious power that was simplified from that mysterious technique was clearly the best place to start. In this case, the appearance of this woman was simply like a pillow when he wanted to sleep. At this moment, he had already made up his mind. No matter what this woman's motive was, he could not let this woman go. At the very least, he had to dig out the essence of that mysterious power from her. At this moment, with a thought in his heart, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. His figure directly broke through the layers of space-time and quickly headed towards the space-time where the woman was. According to the distance between this world and the woman, she was at least billions of light years away from where Luo Fan was. With such a distance, she had clearly entered the continent that Luo Fan could see with a single glance. As for whether she was in the depths of the continent, it would depend on how big the continent was. The woman had clearly noticed Luo Fan's actions. She furrowed her brows, and the anger that was being emitted from her became even more intense. Along with the change in his mood, a red flame gradually appeared in the surrounding space. It was none other than anger. These flames of anger filled the surroundings, and even filled up the absolute vacuum that had been triggered by the collision between Luo Fan and her methods, which should not have appeared in this world. In a trance, this place seemed to have turned into a sea of anger. Moving the space-time in this world was more difficult than the third level of the Tao Master's path. From time to time, an indescribable chaotic force appeared around him out of thin air. It seemed to be stirred up by the space-time and formed an obstruction to him. It even took him to randomly teleport him to a strange place. Fortunately, Luo Fan's current strength was quite strong. According to his understanding of the third level of the Tao Master's Road, he had the most perfect response to every kind of change that occurred. Although he was disturbed by the accidents in the process of shuttling, in the end, it only slightly slowed down his speed, and he did not deviate in the slightest from the direction of the woman. Finally, after dozens of breaths, he directly traversed hundreds of millions of light years of space-time and appeared in a sea of anger. This was where the woman was. At this moment, the woman quietly floated in the sea and looked at Luo Fan with a gaze that seemed to want to poke 1,000 holes into him. I've guarded the world for billions of years. You're the first one who dares to take the initiative to attack me after being discovered by me. The woman said at this time. Her voice was crisp and pleasant, but the anger contained in it made the surrounding sea of anger even more vigorous. Guard the world. Luo Fan was slightly shocked. Although he did not clearly understand what it meant, at least he knew the woman's understanding of his identity. Guarding the world means to prevent the occurrence of any damage to the world. I don't know that I can cause damage to the world. Luo Fan looked at her and said lightly. Compared to the woman's every move, every emotional change, and every change of expression, which was enough to cause a huge reaction in the surrounding space-time, Luo Fan's performance was relatively calm. His words only seemed a little mysterious. As for any impact on the surrounding environment, it did not affect at all. Not destroyed? What's going on with that island? Do you think that no one will notice the disappearance of those islands? The woman said at this time. As she spoke, her voice sounded like she was asking a question. Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled and said, I admit that the disappearance of those islands is related to me. But before he could finish, the woman interrupted him. Since it's related, then it's fine. You should calm down for billions of years first. As she spoke, she suddenly raised her hand and slapped at Luo Fan in the air. With this slap, the infinite mysterious power was like an earth-shattering wave, carrying infinite power as it pounced towards Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan felt as if billions of times of space-time were stacking together and crushing towards him. You want to seal me for billions of years? I don't have that much time. At this moment, he already understood what the other party was thinking, and he could not help but feel displeased. Then he let out a soft cry, and as his power surged, streams of concept god art gushed out of his body. They formed a chaotic light shadow in the void and rushed towards a mysterious power. However, at this moment, he had already used his most powerful technique. The chaotic light shadow that was formed from the combination of countless concept god arts was actually a state that was formed after every concept in the world of laws was transformed and strengthened. It contained the power of countless concept god arts, and due to their respective chaos, the countless concept god arts even reacted with each other and gave birth to all kinds of terrifying power that did not originally exist. As soon as the chaotic light shadow appeared, it instantly suppressed the surrounding sea of anger and directly melted it, causing the previous absolute vacuum to reappear in the surroundings. Immediately after, the chaotic light shadow surged and brazenly devoured the mysterious power completely. It minced and melted it, causing the mysterious power to collapse bit by bit, causing the chaotic light shadow to continuously pounce towards the woman. Even if the mysterious power contained all kinds of profundities and power that Luo Fan could not understand, no matter what, these profundities and power were not absolutely invincible. If the difference in quantity was to a certain extent, no matter how mysterious and incredible the profundities and power were, they would still not be able to defy the heavens. This was the case at this moment. Although the mysterious power had mysteries that Luo Fan could not understand, under the combination of concept god arts that were countless times more powerful than it, it could not put up any effective resistance at all. After being stirred by the chaotic light shadow, it was violently scattered and destroyed at this moment. The woman had a horrified expression on her face. However, this shock didn't even have the time to affect the surrounding space-time before it disappeared. Because at this moment, the chaotic light shadow that Luo Fan released had instantly broken through all her defenses, minced all her power, and devoured her directly. Although the destructive power of the chaotic light shadow was unimaginably powerful, it was still a combination of concept god arts that Luo Fan released. However, Luo Fan's control over it could not be weakened by much. Under such circumstances, it was naturally a simple matter for him to devour a certain existence without destroying it. As the woman was devoured by the chaotic light shadow, the various phenomena in the surroundings began to calm down. Her location, which had originally been concealed by the existence of this woman, was now gradually being revealed. That place was a platform built on top of a certain mountain peak. There were thousands of times more worlds and space-time than other materials gathered on the platform. On the surface of the platform, there were extremely complicated runes, lines, and patterns outlined with some power that Luo Fan could not understand. The combination of all these made the platform have a charm that transcended the world. Luo Fan integrated his perception into the platform. In an instant, he discovered that his perception had begun to spread wildly. In the blink of an eye, it had already surpassed the limits of his perception, and he could see the various details within a range of billions of light years. An unknown amount of information seeped into his heart through his senses, causing him to vaguely feel his understanding of the world rapidly increasing. After an unknown amount of time, it seemed to be just a moment, but also like millions of years. The various information that poured in gradually began to weaken, and Luo Fan also began to gradually return to his senses. Finally, he let out a long sigh. I didn't expect it to be like this. Through the situation of the world that he had sensed with the help of the platform, he finally had a general and comprehensive understanding of the world. The situation of the world was indeed somewhat similar to the third level of the road to Tao Master. However, compared to the third level of the road to Tao Master, it was more stable, and the mystery of space-time and the mysteries of the world were more deeply hidden. Apart from that, there was a similar platform at regular intervals in this world. These platforms stood in special places and were closely connected to each other, forming a huge network that monitored every inch of space-time and every inch of land in this world. The platform that Luo Fan was on now monitored this continent that was millions of times larger than half of the big world, as well as the surrounding ocean area that was hundreds of times larger than this continent. Of course, this was only what Luo Fan sensed through the magnification of his perception through the platform. As for the purpose of this kind of surveillance, and what exactly it was monitoring before he communicated with the creatures in this world, he was not clear. On this continent where he was now, the number of creatures was quite large. The variety was even more abundant than he had imagined. Among them, there were tens of billions of species of intelligent creatures that Luo Fan now knew. These tens of billions of species of intelligent creatures had established their own civilization systems in various parts of this continent. There were disputes, friendships, grievances, love, and hatred between them. It could be said that each kind of intelligent species had an epic history with other intelligent species. The situation of the whole continent was more complicated than any continent that Luo Fan had seen before. As for the cultivators, there were so many civilizations on this continent, but the number of cultivation civilizations was hundreds of times more than the number of these civilizations. Among such a large number of cultivation civilizations, there were so many cultivation systems that it had reached the point where Luo Fan was dumbfounded. Moreover, what was more important was that almost every one of these cultivation civilizations was faintly related to the supreme mystery, as if they were formed by some kind of simplification of that mystery. Of course, almost all of the cultivation systems were simplified to a degree that was tens of thousands of times stronger than the mysterious simplification of the woman that Luo Fan had subdued. Only a very small number of cultivation systems could barely approach this degree of simplification. In other words, the one that possessed the most mysterious characteristics was the mysterious power that the woman that Luo Fan had subdued just now. It was because he understood the structure of this world that Luo Fan understood why these platforms formed a tight network between each other, and why he could still subdue the woman and take over the platform. He could use the platform's power to obtain all kinds of information that he needed. The reason was very simple. It was because this world was just too vast. Just the number of platforms that he could faintly sense right now was in the trillions. Moreover, he could faintly sense that there were even more platforms that were countless times more than the platforms that he could sense. With so many platforms, no matter how powerful a cultivator was, it would be impossible for them to keep track of every single one of them at all times. It was even more impossible for them to immediately know if the other platforms had changed owners or if the original owners had been suppressed. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan could easily occupy this platform at this time. Of course, if there was an existence that was familiar with the owner of this platform, it would naturally be easier for them to notice the abnormality of this platform and discover that the owner of this platform had been suppressed. However, it was clear that this woman was not very popular, but almost none of the other platforms could sense this place at all times. Chapter 2134. The woman looked at Luo Fan with a speechless expression. Luo Fan smiled again and said, "All right, now that things have come to this, I can't give up this platform anymore. What do you plan to do next?" It didn't matter if he was bullying a child or not. This platform was very important to him. It was fine before he took it over, but now that he had taken it over, he naturally couldn't give it back. As for what this woman wanted, it would depend on what her request was. If her request was acceptable, he wouldn't be stingy to help her a little. Of course, if her request was too much, he could only go back to where he came from. Seeing Luo Fan like this, the woman's expression became even more displeased. How could this be? He had been doing so well as a guardian here. Suddenly, his platform was snatched away, his identity was snatched away, and now he was treated as if he was a charity. How could he tolerate this? Immediately, she shouted, "What I do doesn't need you to care. Oomph. I will definitely find a way to take back this guardian platform." With that, she snorted and turned around to leave. Luo Fan saw this and said helplessly, "You plan to leave just like that? How'd you get this platform back then? Where's the guardian that you took away the platform from back then?" Hearing this, the woman was slightly startled. She turned around and looked at Luo Fan with eyes full of vigilance. Seeing her like this, Luo Fan knew that this person probably didn't obtain this platform through proper means. And the previous guardian probably didn't have a good ending either. "What do you want? Do you want to silence me too?" "Silence me? I didn't expect you to be so decisive, even though you don't look like much." Luo Fan looked at her with a surprised expression. "It's not my fault. He kept pestering me." The woman heard this and hurriedly said, "With your ability, it's impossible for you to defeat a guardian without any reinforcement. How did you do it? Who helped you?" Luo Fan asked. "Oomph. Now you know fear. You should know that I'm not alone." At this moment, the woman's expression revealed a lofty charm as she looked down at Luo Fan and said so. Hearing this, Luo Fan couldn't help but laugh and said, "You really aren't alone. However, I've been occupying your position for so many years, but no one has discovered it. Why is that?" The woman blushed slightly. Luo Fan's words were clearly the best refutation to her claim that she was not alone, and it was a retort that she had no way of dealing with. After all, if she really had a companion, why wouldn't they care about her? She didn't even care that her territory had been robbed for so many years. However, even if he lost in person, he wouldn't lose in spirit. It was obvious that this woman wouldn't admit defeat so easily. At this moment, she said, "If they weren't in closed-door cultivation, you would have pissed your pants by now." Okay. All your friends are in closed-door cultivation. None of them happened to come out and contact you all these years. Luo Fan said with a smile. His teasing tone made the woman's expression turn ugly. Don't worry, I won't go so far as to silence you. After all, it's not a big deal. Luo Fan looked at the woman's increasingly stiff expression and said with a smile. Hearing this, the woman heaved a sigh of relief at first, but then she felt displeased. What does this mean? Isn't it a big deal that my cultivation was taken away by someone else? How about this? I won't be at ease if you leave. I won't go so far as to silence you. Since that's the case, you should stay here and cultivate. Don't leave my sensing range so that I can find you whenever I want. Luo Fan said faintly. You want to imprison me? The woman's expression changed drastically. Compared to your methods, my methods are considered mild, right? Luo Fan looked at the woman and said faintly without any change in his expression. Hearing this, the woman couldn't breathe. Clearly, Luo Fan didn't have the mood to be entangled with her anymore. With a thought, he pointed at the surroundings, and the countless worlds in the surroundings began to quickly assemble, condense, and construct. In the blink of an eye, an extremely vast space-time was formed and placed in a position not far from the platform. Please, after doing this, he said to the woman. The woman was very displeased and wanted to resist with all her might. But in the end, she couldn't make up her mind and could only slowly walk into that space-time. After sending the woman into that space-time, Luo Fan shook his head and sighed. With a wave of his hand, that space-time was directly sealed into the void and couldn't be found anymore. After subduing the woman, Luo Fan turned his attention to the large area that the platform affected. Everything that happened in this region was no secret to the platform. In other words, Luo Fan would be able to know whatever he wanted to know from this platform within the range of billions and trillions of light years. No matter how big or small it was, he would be able to know it without missing a single detail. There were so many civilizations in this area, and the number of cultivation systems was countless times greater than the number of civilizations. In this way, the number of cultivation methods had reached a level that was beyond the imagination of any living being. According to Luo Fan's previous understanding, all the cultivation systems in this area were more or less related to that mystery, and could even be said to be a simplified version of that mystery. In this way, as long as Luo Fan studied those cultivation methods, he would naturally be able to get close to that mystery to a certain extent, and then get close to breaking through a certain layer of the world that was constructed by the fifth disaster that simulated the state of chaos. Although Luo Fan could already use some of the mysterious power that the woman had used before with the help of the Sky Connecting Platform's power, it was still a preliminary use after all. However, that was only the first step of using it. His understanding of that mysterious power was limited to just how it was formed, but not how it was formed. In other words, he knew how to use this mysterious power and how to make it exert a corresponding effect. However, he did not know how to cultivate this mysterious power, nor did he know what the essence of this mysterious power was. In comparison, who knew how many civilizations in this area were involved in this mysterious cultivation system? Although their levels were many times lower than the platforms, he still got close to that mystery from nothing. The specific cultivation methods and the cultivation principles within were great inspirations for Luo Fan. In particular, with the mysterious power brought by the platform as a comparison, the inspirations were even more powerful. In particular, with the mysterious power brought by the platform as a comparison, the inspirations were even more powerful. There were hundreds of millions of cultivation systems, and every cultivation system had countless cultivation sections. Naturally, there were even more cultivation methods. Wanting to study these cultivation methods clearly was a project that almost made one despair. Just looking at the many cultivation methods and memorizing them was enough to make any cultivator break down. Of course, this only included other cultivators, and Luo Fan was obviously not included. After all, Luo Fan's Taoist heart had already reached a state of eternal immobility. In addition, these cultivation methods were related to him getting through the fifth disaster, so he had no choice but to be serious and devote himself wholeheartedly to them. Under such circumstances, how could he break down because of the number of cultivation methods? On the contrary, he felt inexplicably happy because of the large number of cultivation methods. This was because the more cultivation methods there were, the more aspects of the mysterious power that were involved. With the help of these cultivation methods, the true appearance of the mysterious power would naturally be more accurate. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan used his mind to continuously absorb the many cultivation methods with his powerful perception. He categorized the cultivation methods in his mind, extracted all aspects of the mysterious power that were involved in the cultivation methods, and piled them up in his mind. Such a process would last for tens of thousands of years. In such a vast area, there were so many living beings, and there were so many civilizations. There would be new cultivation methods being created almost every moment, and even new cultivation systems would be created. In other words, the process of plundering all the cultivation techniques and cultivation systems in this area could be said to be a never-ending process. Even though he had unknowingly been collecting for nearly 100,000 years, Luo Fan still felt that it was a project that would take forever to collect all the cultivation methods. Every time he found a certain number of cultivation methods, there would naturally be a relatively large number of cultivation methods being created in that area. These newly created cultivation methods were all created on the basis of the cultivation methods of the predecessors. Regardless of whether they were crude or exquisite, they would definitely have mysteries that were different from the predecessors. In other words, it was impossible for Luo Fan to give up on them. Roughly speaking, it had been close to 100,000 years, and he had already collected more than 1 trillion cultivation techniques. However, compared to the cultivation techniques in the region, he had only collected 60 to 70% of the total number of cultivation techniques. On this day, Luo Fan sighed and stopped his incessant collection of cultivation techniques. Looks like I need to tidy things up first. With this thought in mind, he began to withdraw his mind and immerse himself in his mind. In his mind, the many cultivation methods had already turned into endless books. There were so many that when they were piled together, they had already formed a world of books. Among them, the sky was a book, the earth was a book, the mountains were a book, everything that ran on the ground, flew in the sky, swam in the water, and even the boundless ocean were all books. Some of these books were extremely huge, some were extremely small, some were extremely sturdy, some were extremely fragile, some were extremely thick, and some were extremely thin. The endless books had their own way, and vaguely formed a mysterious balance between the heaven and earth. This caused the heaven and earth to vaguely have rules and laws controlling everything, and there were all kinds of reincarnations pushing the books in them to constantly change. At this moment, Luo Fan immersed himself in the world of the books, and when he looked up, he felt that everything in the world was imprinted in his eyes. There's actually such a change. Looking at all of this, he could not help but feel a little puzzled. After all, this change was not something that he had deliberately mystified. In other words, what he had done back then was merely to send the many cultivation methods into his mind in the form of books. As for why these books had formed this way after that, and why they had become like this, it was completely because the books, or rather the cultivation methods, had interfered and influenced each other to form this way. To be more specific, perhaps the books themselves, or the mysterious factors contained in the cultivation methods, were at work, and that was why the many cultivation methods had formed this way. This seemed very unbelievable, but in fact, it was understandable. The accumulation of a quantitative change would lead to a qualitative change. This logic was reasonable at any level. If it was only a few books or a few cultivation methods, even if there were some slight mysteries in them, it would not lead to a qualitative change that was truly incomprehensible. However, when a number of cultivation methods increased to a certain extent, when the traces of subtle mysteries contained in each cultivation method accumulated and turned into a colossus that was enough to split the heavens and the earth and give birth to all living beings, that kind of change would naturally become uncontrollable. In the end, in Luo Fan's heart, it was only natural for it to form this kind of appearance. Luo Fan stood there quietly with an indescribable expression on his face, and he became even more interested in the mysterious power. Previously, he only wanted to study the mysterious power in order to transcend this world and survive the fifth Great Tribulation. But now, after witnessing the great changes that could be caused by the cultivation method itself, he had shifted his interest to the mysterious power itself. In other words, right now, what he was interested in was the mysterious power itself, and not the hope it represented that it could break through this world and survive this great calamity. Let me see what exactly is so mysterious about this mysterious power. With that thought in mind, he dived into the ocean of books and spread out his perception to observe and comprehend every single book. He sensed the mechanism behind the many books that formed this ocean. All of the books contained traces of mystery. This mystery was extremely faint. Whether it was 1 book, 10 books, 100 books, 1,000 books, or even 10,000 books added together, it was insignificant. It was not enough to produce any effect. However, at this moment, the mystery had become spectacular when trillions and trillions of books were added together. In this world of books, the mystery had already turned into something similar to the great Tao of this world. It directly controlled all the rules and laws of this world, as well as the fate of all the books. Luo Fan read the many books, or rather, read the many cultivation methods, in order to achieve his ultimate goal and completely see through the mystery behind them. It was like a living being in the normal world trying to understand the great Tao by observing everything. It went without saying that the difficulty of this task was extremely high. Fortunately, Luo Fan's own cultivation realm was high enough, and his own comprehension had reached an unimaginable level, which was why he was able to grasp the traces within. Otherwise, he would have sunk into the various changes in the world very soon and become muddle-headed. It might even have been difficult for him to break free. Just as Luo Fan was searching for the mysteries hidden within the world of books in his mind, a subtle ripple suddenly appeared in a certain space on the platform. These subtle ripples were very mysterious and obscure. Within those ripples, one could vaguely sense a special existence that resonated with the platform. As the ripples appeared, wisps of mysterious power faintly seeped out from the platform. This power was incomparably obscure and subtle. Even if Luo Fan was still clear-headed, it would still be difficult for him to discover the existence of this power. Not to mention that Luo Fan had withdrawn his spirit and was completely immersed in his own mind, immersed in the ocean of books. This kind of change was completely beyond his senses at this moment. It was gathering towards the void right before his eyes, constantly invading the depths of the void where the fluctuation existed. This process continued, and as time passed, it became more and more severe and obvious. In the end, in just a few decades, that space had changed, and a faintly discernible illusory figure gradually appeared in that area. That phantom image was an incomparably beautiful world. In that world, any scene that could be found in the world could be found in it. Amidst the many beautiful sceneries, there was a figure sitting cross-legged in the air. Chapter 2135. At this moment, the woman seemed to be observing the platform through some kind of method, and a look of excitement appeared on her face. Phone, update fast. Please search. Oomph. As expected, you've fallen into a state where you forget yourself. A joyful cry came from her mouth. Immediately afterward, a fluctuation that was hundreds of times more powerful than before suddenly erupted from her body. It began to draw upon the power on the platform even more powerfully, causing an even more powerful, mysterious power to appear on the platform and blast into the illusory space-time. With this change, the illusory space-time began to quickly become real. At a certain moment, as the void trembled violently, it directly appeared and truly descended into this space-time, this world. At this point, the woman naturally could no longer be obstructed. She let out a soft cry, and as the power in her body surged, she brazenly broke through the space-time where she was, directly tearing it apart and destroying all the beautiful scenes within it. She directly crossed space-time and appeared above the platform. After arriving here, the woman took a deep breath, and an extremely satisfied expression appeared on her face. At this moment, there were still all kinds of subtle fluctuations constantly being emitted from her body. These fluctuations were so subtle, so mysterious. As they surged, they constantly permeated the space-time, constantly resonating with the platform under Luo Fan in a subtle way. With this change, strands of mysterious power continuously poured into her body, causing her strength to begin to increase at a speed visible to the naked eye. This process of improvement was almost endless. Her figure floating in the void became more and more powerful as this change continued, and the aura on her body also became more and more profound. After a while, the woman forcibly stopped this process of cultivation, and the fluctuations emitted from her body gradually retracted. The divine light in her eyes began to condense on Luo Fan, who was on the platform. The woman looked at Luo Fan and murmured, "I still have to thank you. If you hadn't imprisoned me, I wouldn't have known that the power actually had such a magical effect." After she was imprisoned in the space-time by Luo Fan, she could only wholeheartedly study the brand that she had previously thrown into the platform, hoping to gain something from the brand and improve her strength. In the past, she had occupied the platform, and every move she made could bring about endless mysterious power, causing drastic changes beyond imagination. Naturally, she disdained to study the mysteriousness of the brand. It was precisely because of this that she had always been limited to using the mysterious power. Even if she had done some research, it was only to find out how to unleash the mysterious power's greater power, to create a greater impact, and to cause greater destruction. Now, under Luo Fan's coercion, she could only place her hopes on the brand. She had finally stepped onto the correct path of studying the source of the mysterious power and to study the mysteriousness of the mysterious power. Because of this, everything that had happened before had happened. It was precisely because of this that the woman said that she wanted to thank Luo Fan at this moment. At this moment, the woman no longer felt anger and displeasure towards Luo Fan in her heart. Instead, she felt a subtle sense of gratitude. After all, although Luo Fan's methods were violent, it was precisely because of him that she was able to sense the profoundness of the mysterious power. It was also because of him that she knew that there were so many secrets and so many profundities hidden within the mysterious power. It was also because of this that her strength had improved greatly at this moment. She even seemed to be a step closer to breaking through and attaining the Tao. However, although she felt a subtle sense of gratitude, it did not mean that she would show mercy to Luo Fan and directly give the platform to Luo Fan. On the contrary, it was precisely because she knew the profoundness of the mysterious power that she was even more determined to take back the platform. She wanted to take back the unlimited authority to use the mysterious power that she had previously possessed. After all, just that little imprint was enough to give him such great benefits, allowing his cultivation to improve greatly. If he regained the unlimited mysterious power and was able to use it limitlessly, then it went without saying how many benefits he could obtain. Under such circumstances, how could she give up just because of a subtle sense of gratitude towards Luo Fan? At this moment, the woman raised her hand and slowly grabbed towards Luo Fan. In front of her, a faintly discernible shadow of a huge palm formed by the mysterious power appeared. This huge palm phantom was completely formed by the condensation of a mysterious power. This power contained a characteristic, which was that it was extremely obscure. Even though she clearly saw the existence of the palm and saw it slowly reaching towards Luo Fan on the platform, she could not sense the existence of the palm at all. Even the existence that was targeted by the palm could not sense it. In the past, this woman would definitely not have been able to use such a subtle method. It was only now that she had a deeper understanding of the mysterious power and had a more subtle control over it that she could do this. Just this change alone was enough to show how great her improvement was. The palm shadow had already penetrated the defense of the platform and reached Luo Fan's side. It wrapped around Luo Fan and slowly shrank. Although it was only a shadow, the palm was still formed by the mysterious power after all. Under normal circumstances, if this palm was placed in a perfect world, it would definitely be enough to cause the world to flip and completely destroy everything in the world. Therefore, one could imagine that if Luo Fan were to be caught by this palm, the consequences would definitely be unbearable for him. At this moment, when the woman's face was filled with joy, Luo Fan suddenly opened his eyes. As he opened his eyes, the platform shook and an extremely powerful, mysterious power instantly destroyed the palm. It even went a step further and directly rushed up, destroying the fluctuations around the woman's body and the mysterious power contained in her body. Even the mark that the woman had left in her body was quickly washed away, and the traces of the mysterious power on it started to quickly dim. At this moment, the woman suddenly screamed, "No! Leave some for me! Leave some for me! I won't dare to do it again! I won't dare to do it again!" Her movements were so swift, and her begging was so straightforward and decisive that it made one suspect that she had actually been prepared to beg for mercy a long time ago. At this moment, Luo Fan frowned and stopped what he was doing. He left some traces of the mysterious power on the woman's mark and just stopped there. At this moment, the woman heaved a sigh of relief and said, "As long as you leave some traces on me, I won't do anything to you anymore. I'll even admit to others that you're the successor of the Guardian platform. You seem to have been prepared for a long time." Luo Fan said indifferently at this moment. Hearing his words, the woman's body trembled and a bitter expression appeared on her face. She said, "Of course, no matter what, you're much stronger than me, and you have the protection of the Guardian platform. Although I've found some tricks and obtained some key to my strength, I'm not confident that I can defeat you." Her words were not just perfunctory, but what she really thought. Although the woman's battle experience and knowledge were countless times worse than Luo Fan's, she was still a cultivator who had cultivated to the entering calamity level. Naturally, his intelligence was not weak. Although she had already obtained the essence of the mysterious power, found a way to dig out the deeper mysteries of the mysterious power, and even dug out a more exquisite method of using it, she did not lose her rationality and self-awareness. She was very clear that no matter what advantages she had, no matter how much better she was at using the power than before, after all, her cultivation realm was still there. After all, the gap between her and Luo Fan was so great that it was simply unimaginable. Under such circumstances, how could she have enough confidence to think that she could defeat Luo Fan with this little bit of understanding of the power? Therefore, although she appeared to be so confident and domineering before, in fact, she was already prepared for failure in her heart. That was why she begged for mercy so decisively before. Hearing these words, Luo Fan could not help but laugh. Although he had fallen into the world of books to understand the mysteries of the mysterious power, it was still equivalent to being immersed in his own mind. This state seemed to be a state where he forgot about himself and everything else, but it was not to the extent where he could not wake up when his life was threatened. In this way, the development of the matter was very obvious. Because the woman's action of escaping did not affect him much, he did not sense it and naturally did not stop her. However, after that, the woman wanted to take him away and cut off his connection with the platform, which was obviously too great a threat. Naturally, he sensed it and was able to escape and take action to resist. All of this should not have been difficult for the woman to think of, but she did not think of it at that time. This could only be described as being blinded by greed. At this moment, the woman looked at Luo Fan pitifully with an expectant expression. "What are you waiting for? Didn't you say that you're going to admit that I'm the successor of this platform to the others?" Luo Fan asked calmly. Actually, as long as I don't resist, you'll be the acknowledged successor," the woman said hesitantly. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but smile bitterly. In fact, the reason was that simple. There were so many guardian platforms in this world, or rather, sky-reaching platforms. The difference in strength between them was not too great. Under such circumstances, it was naturally unlikely for an expert to appear who could suppress and rule over everything. Under such circumstances, it was naturally very unlikely for so many platforms to form a tight organization. Without a tight organization, it was naturally impossible for them to be too concerned about the replacement of the platform's owner. Therefore, it could be imagined that if a platform's owner changed and there was no news of the previous owner, it would be enough to put an end to this matter, regardless of whether the previous owner was dead or had willingly acknowledged the other party's authority. Forget it. Since that's the case, you should just cultivate here obediently. Anyway, it doesn't matter if you're here or not. Luo Fan sighed and said. Hearing this, the woman was stunned at first, but then she was overjoyed and said, "Are you really willing to let me cultivate here? If you continue talking nonsense, you'll leave." Luo Fan frowned. No more nonsense. No more nonsense. My name is Shu Si. What's your name?" The woman giggled, but she did not seem to be in awe of Luo Fan. After all, the woman had interacted with Luo Fan before and realized that Luo Fan was not an unreasonable person. Her awe of him had decreased a lot, and she was not afraid of him anymore. At this moment, Luo Fan just closed his eyes and could not be bothered to pay attention to her. Seeing this, Shu Si did not continue to pester him. She immediately opened up a dojo that floated in the void beside the platform and stepped into it. The dojo was constructed from the boundless heavens and earth and time. Every piece of rock and every speck of dust was all-encompassing and contained endless mysteries. It could be said that this dojo alone would be enough to attract the attention of an existence like Luo Fan in any other space-time. If there was someone with a slightly lower cultivation realm, they might even directly rob it and cause a bloodbath. However, in this place, the dojo was nothing more than an ordinary thing. The woman was even a little dissatisfied after opening it up and did not think it was something to be proud of. After stepping into the dojo, Shu Si did not hesitate. She immediately triggered the brand in her body and began to communicate with the mysterious power. With the help of the mysterious power, she further communicated with the platform. She began to guide strands of mysterious power to seep into the dojo from the platform, causing the dojo to constantly evolve and undergo subtle changes. Under these changes, the Taoist right field gradually seeped into the void. Before anyone realized it, it had become a part of the void, a part of the world. It looked more and more like it was formed naturally and not something created by a cultivator. At this moment, Luo Fan glanced at the dojo and closed his eyes again. His mind was once again immersed in the world of books. He did not seem to have changed much on the surface, but compared to before, he had actually communicated with the mysterious power inside the platform. The mysterious power coiled around him and formed an incomparably tight and powerful defense that protected him from head to toe. He was guarding against something similar to what had just happened. Although Shu Si did not cause any serious consequences just now, that was only because Shu Si was not strong enough. If Shu Si was strong enough, as long as she reached the third tribulation level, the result would not be like this anymore, let alone his level. After all, no matter what, he was in a state where he forgot about himself and the world. Although he had some reaction to the stimulation of the outside world, it could not be compared to his normal state. Under such circumstances, if there was an expert who was decisive enough, the trouble he would be in would be countless times more than under normal circumstances. Naturally, it was impossible to truly destroy him. However, to injure him and force him out of the state of cultivation and comprehension was a piece of cake for him. That was the reason he needed so much mysterious power to hide around him and protect himself. Shu Si did not seem to notice Luo Fan's actions. At this moment, she felt an unprecedented sense of peace and relaxation. This sense of peace and relaxation was so wonderful that she could not help but immerse herself in it. It must be known that in the past, although she became a guardian and received the support of the platform, the responsibility of guarding this area that came with the support also made her heart heavy, making it difficult for her to truly relax. Even if she was cultivating, she still needed to pay attention to the area that the platform radiated and carefully watch out for any abnormalities that might appear in this area. In fact, the reason why she did not have the mood to delve into the profundities and essence of the mysterious power was also because of the heavy responsibility weighing on her heart. However, it was clearly different now. Although she had lost control of the platform, she had also lost the responsibility that came with control. This made her feel relaxed, and she felt that her heart had become clear. In comparison, comprehending the mysterious power had become a layer away, and it was difficult for her to use the mysterious power as she pleased like before. However, it could be said to be an insignificant price to pay. I can finally focus on cultivation. At this moment, Shu Si felt that the entire world seemed to have gone through an earth-shattering change. It became more vivid and wonderful. She occasionally glanced at the figure on the platform, and a gloating look appeared in her eyes. You'll know how heavy this responsibility is in the future. She was putting herself in his shoes, feeling that she had to bear the heavy responsibility that came with occupying the platform. However, she did not know that in Luo Fan's eyes, the platform was just a way for him to comprehend the mysterious power and further comprehend the high and mighty mystery. Why would he care about the responsibility that came with the platform? Chapter 21:36. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, millions of years had passed. On this day, Luo Fan's body suddenly emitted a strange and mysterious power. Compared to the mysterious power that he could use with the help of the platform, this mysterious power was simply insignificant. However, with the appearance of this mysterious power, Luo Fan could not help but reveal a satisfied smile on his face. This wisp of mysterious power was also incompatible with the mysterious power that the platform could produce. It was as if they were two completely different things. This change caused Shu Si, who was in the dojo, to suddenly wake up from her cultivation state. What's going on? Why is the Guardian platform reacting so violently? Shu Si's expression changed slightly. She turned her eyes and saw through the dojo to see the situation on the platform not far away. The platform looked very calm to everyone else, but only Shu Si, who was extremely familiar with the platform, knew how turbulent the platform was at this moment. The mysterious power was on the verge of going berserk. If it was not for some kind of power restraining the mysterious power from exploding, the mysterious power might have blown the entire platform to pieces. She had never encountered such a situation. Even in the hundreds of millions of years that she had controlled the platform, she had never heard of any platform experiencing such a change. She carefully observed Luo Fan, who was sitting cross-legged on the platform. If there was anyone who could cause such a change, then it was obviously Luo Fan, who was sitting on the platform. When she saw Luo Fan clearly, her expression changed. How was this possible? This is a completely different power. She murmured, her eyes filled with disbelief. At this moment, Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes and lowered his head to look at the platform below. An indescribable joy suddenly appeared on his face. As expected, the power that one condenses and the power that is bestowed are completely different, he murmured. Hearing this, how could Shu Si not know that her guess was correct? In an instant, she left the dojo in a flash and appeared not far away from Luo Fan. She shouted, "How did you do it?" Luo Fan just smiled and said, "It's not difficult, although it takes a little more time." As he spoke, the strands of mysterious energy that emanated from his body suddenly condensed under his control, and they transformed into strands of fine threads that suddenly pierced into the platform below. Crack! An earth-shattering sound of thunder erupted from the platform. The entire platform began to shake violently, as if a huge force had enveloped the platform and caused it to shake violently. This commotion did not only affect the platform, but it also spread out in all directions. 100 miles, 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles, 1,000,000 miles, 10,000,000 miles, 1,000,000,000,000 miles, 1 light year, 100 light years, 1,000 light years, 10,000 light years, 100,000,000 light years. Finally, it spread to all the areas guarded by the platform. In other words, it spread to all the areas that the platform's power radiated. This was a vast area that covered an unknown amount of space. In this boundless area, heaven and earth seemed to be grabbed by a huge hand and shook continuously. There were also some subtle muffled sounds that were constantly produced from the depths of the void and spread to the ears of all living beings in this area, including those that had no ears and could not hear. There were countless races and civilizations in this area. At this moment, there were billions of speculations from various civilizations. All sorts of disturbances were born. Following this disturbance, the area that was already not very peaceful became even more chaotic. Only Luo Fan could clearly sense all these changes. Although Shu Si could form a subtle connection with the platform through her imprint and sense the various changes on the platform, she was no longer the owner of the platform after all. Naturally, it was difficult for her to sense the situation in all areas within the range of the platform through the platform. However, it was obvious that Luo Fan could not be concerned about the changes in the range of the platform at this moment. To him, it was more important for him to refine the platform. That's right. What he was doing now was nothing else but to refine the platform. Leaving the imprint inside the platform could be considered as barely establishing a connection with the platform and being able to control it and borrow its power. However, that was only the preliminary establishment of the connection and not the actual refining of the platform. It could be said that his current relationship with the platform was actually just a level deeper than the relationship between the owners of the other platforms in this world and the platform. In essence, there was still no change. And it was obvious that the relationship between the owners of the platforms and the platform was not a true refinement. After all, if the platform was truly refined, it would be the owner of the platform, and the two were almost inseparable. Even if it was Luo Fan, if he wanted to seize the platform, the only way was to completely erase the owner of the platform. It went without saying how Luo Fan had obtained the platform previously. Under such circumstances, how could they be considered to have completely refined the platform? There was only one way to completely refine the platform, and that was to leave one's imprint in the deepest part of the platform. Then, one's power would become the platform's power, and one's will would become the platform's will. Only by achieving this step could it be considered success. If he could do that, then the secrets of the platform would be completely revealed to him. He would be able to understand and study the platform in a way that was 1,000 times easier than before. After all, if he had truly refined the platform, the connection between him and the platform would be countless times closer. At that time, his will would naturally receive feedback from the platform, and his thoughts would also be echoed by the platform. If he wanted to understand the secrets of the platform would naturally open up to him. At that time, he would be one step closer to the mysterious existence that was unique to this world. With such a goal in mind, he would not hesitate even if his means would completely destroy this region that spanned billions and trillions of light years, not to mention that it was just a little bit of chaos in this region. Although he had only just condensed that mysterious power, compared to the platform, Luo Fan already had an unimaginable advantage. After all, no matter how powerful the platform was, no matter how much mysterious power it possessed, it was still just a platform, and it could not even mobilize that mysterious power to achieve some precise goals. Under such circumstances, facing a cultivation expert like Luo Fan, who could easily play around with power and make any trace of power unleash the effect of hundreds of millions of times, the platform was at a great disadvantage. Under Luo Fan's control, that mysterious power kept shuttling between the cracks of the platform. Not long after, it had brazenly passed through the depth that he had previously left a mark on it, and it continued to pass deeper and deeper into the platform. During this process, he kept making the mysterious power bypass the mysterious power of the platform itself. The technique was hundreds of millions of times more exquisite and mysterious than a butcher dismembering an ox. If a butcher saw Luo Fan's current method of controlling this power, he would definitely throw away the knife that he had used for more than a decade and directly kneel before him. As the mysterious power continued to penetrate deeper, the shaking of the platform became more and more intense. It even caused cracks to appear in the space-time around the platform, causing the laws and laws to constantly fluctuate, creating an increasingly intense chaos. Endless light and shadows appeared in the surroundings at this moment, twisting, turbulent, and changing. Even the great Tao that Luo Fan had previously sensed, that even a single glance from Luo Fan had started to distort subtly at a certain location. This change had long surpassed what Shu Si could endure. Although she had been cultivating hard for so many years, her foundation was still there. At this point, she could only be considered to have truly stabilized her cultivation as a tribulation initiation powerhouse. Faced with this terrifying change that affected who knows how many regions, how could she endure it? At this moment, when she saw that the changes around her were getting stronger and stronger, she finally snorted in dissatisfaction. She turned around and quickly fled into the distance. Although her cultivation was much lower than Luo Fan's, she was still a tribulation initiation powerhouse. After all, her speed was still extremely shocking. In a short span of a few breaths, she had already traversed a distance of an unknown number of trillions of light years, and had crossed the boundary of a large world at this point. Although she could still feel the tremors and the power of the changes coming from the platform, it finally no longer affected her. After stopping, she turned to look at the platform, relying on the connection between her imprint and the platform. Even though her vision could not penetrate such a long distance to see the situation on the platform, she could still vaguely sense everything that was happening there and discover the various changes that were happening on the platform. What is he doing? Does he want to destroy the platform? This was the thought in the woman's mind at this moment. After having this thought, she faintly felt regret in her heart. She regretted giving the platform to Luo Fan so easily back then. After all, she had guarded this region for billions of years, and her feelings for this region had already been established. Seeing that the platform might be destroyed and that it might bring great damage to this vast area, she was in a rather bad mood. However, obviously, she could only think about it at this moment. After all, for Luo Fan, her strength was really not enough at all. Not to mention what she thought now. Even if she did not want to sit back and watch the platform be occupied, what could she do? At this moment, a strange fluctuation was transmitted from a distant region to this region. To be more specific, it was transmitted to the platform in this region. Shu Si, what are you doing? Do you want to destroy heaven and earth? This was a series of questions. All the fluctuations were similar. Some knew Shu Si, and some didn't. However, regardless of whether they knew her or not, they were currently quite dissatisfied. At this moment, Shu Si also sensed the fluctuations transmitted to the platform through the connection between her mark and the platform. She could not help but feel a little anxious. She immediately shouted, "It's not me. It's a cultivator who ascended from the bottom of the world. He took over my guardian platform, and now all of this is his doing." She tried her best to transmit these thoughts to the platform through the mark, and then through the platform to the other platforms, so that those who questioned her would know the truth. Unfortunately, even though she had the imprint and was able to form a connection with the platform, the connection was clearly limited. The fact that she was able to receive the information that the platform had received through this connection was already quite mysterious and had many wondrous uses. How could she let the platform directly transmit her thoughts as if she was really controlling the platform? Therefore, the information she sent out was like a clay ox entering the sea, and there was no response at all. The fluctuations transmitted from all directions continued to pour into the platform, and they continued to question her. Shu Si tried hard for a long time, but she finally realized that her efforts were futile. She could not help but sigh. I hope you can find out that something is wrong and take action as soon as possible. Otherwise, she sighed and quietly floated there with an unconcealable conflicted expression on her face. At this moment, those questions were continuously raised and lasted for several hours. Only when the tremors on the platform had reached a worrisome level did the fluctuations disappear. Soon after, as the fluctuations disappeared, waves of mysterious power began to surge towards this area from all directions. However, these mysterious powers were not targeting the platform, but the area that the platform radiated. They were targeting the vast area that no one knew how many worlds were added together. After these mysterious powers entered this area, they began to seep into the depths of the laws of the world. They formed an indescribable support for these laws, time, and space, causing the tremors in these areas to continuously decrease. Roughly speaking, there were only a few thousand mysterious powers that surged into these areas. Among these thousands of mysterious energies, there were many that disliked each other. In fact, just the contact between mysterious energies would cause them to clash and fight with each other. Under such circumstances, even though their choice had stabilized this region by quite a bit, it was still not enough. But in the end, it made this area even more dangerous. Moreover, the battle between the mysterious powers was even more terrifying than the battle between ordinary powers. As the two mysterious powers collided, almost large areas of space and time were destroyed. Mountains and rivers were reduced to nothingness, and deep pits that reached all the way to the bottom appeared on the ground. This deepened the disaster for the living beings living in this area. Shu Si, who had sensed some changes, had an ugly expression on her face. What are they trying to do? Isn't the most important thing to do now to stabilize the situation here? What are they fighting for now? She said angrily. She could sense the chaos from where she was, which was enough to show how serious the chaos was. Such a serious chaos felt even more dangerous than letting the area continue to tremble. It was a pity that she had no right to speak about all of this. The only thing she could do now was to vent her anger here. Not only would Luo Fan ignore her, but the other protectors would also not bother to pay attention to her. At this moment, facing such a situation, Luo Fan did not care about the arrival of the mysterious powers at all. He was only focused on refining the platform. It wasn't easy to use his own mysterious power to replace the mysterious power within the platform and fuse himself with the mysterious platform. In particular, it was even more so when he could not understand the true profundity of the platform at all. At this moment, Luo Fan's mysterious power had brazenly penetrated the obstruction of the endless mysterious power in the platform and arrived at the deepest part of the platform. He arrived at the infinite runes on the platform and the countless lines that were outlined by the endless mysterious power. But even so, he was still extremely far away from truly refining the platform. Luo Fan had long expected this situation. At this moment, he manipulated the mysterious power that he had comprehended from the world of books to continuously attack the mysterious power that existed in the depths of the platform. It seeped in bit by bit and replaced the mysterious power with great difficulty. This was an unimaginably huge project, and it would take an extremely long time to complete it. Regarding this, Luo Fan was already clear about it. However, he was not discouraged at all, nor was he worried that his actions would be obstructed. After all, the power of the platform itself was enough to make any living being in this world fearful. Even if there was a problem here, the living beings in other areas would definitely not dare to step into this area to stop him. Chapter 21:37. What the hell are you guys doing? The most important thing right now is not the enmity between you guys. At this moment, Shu Si finally could not hold it in any longer. She let out a loud roar, and with the help of the mysterious power, her voice was transmitted to this region that covered an unknown amount of space. The mysterious power was mysterious after all. With Shu Si's current ability, it was already her limit to transmit her voice to several large worlds. However, with the help of the mysterious power, Her voice forcibly passed through hundreds of large worlds and finally reached the area affected by the many fighting mysterious powers. The owners of the mysterious powers could use this mysterious power to sense the other mysterious powers. Since the owners of the other mysterious powers were her enemies, they could naturally sense what was happening in these areas. In other words, they could hear Shu Xi's words. At this moment, a voice came from the mysterious power. Shu Xi, what's wrong with you? Weren't you the one who caused all these disasters on the Guardian platform? Of course it wasn't me. It was my successor, Shu Xi said angrily. This was too obvious, all right? How dare they suspect her now? However, in the end, she still had quite a bit of integrity. Even at this time, she still abided by the promise she had made with Luo Fan. She acknowledged Luo Fan as her successor like the others, rather than forcibly snatching him from her hands. Of course, aside from keeping her promise, perhaps there was another important reason. That was admitting that she was in control of the platform and letting other cultivators forcibly take it away and expel her was simply too shameful. Hearing this, the Guardians came to a sudden realization. They weren't familiar with Shu Xi, so most of them naturally didn't care if Shu Xi was in control of all this. Nor did they care why Shu Xi would pass the Guardian platform to another cultivator. In fact, many cultivators actually didn't care about what would happen to this area. They only cared about what would happen to their enemies. Only one cultivator who was somewhat acquainted with Shu Xi asked, "What's going on? Didn't you value the Guardian's identity a lot? Why would you suddenly pass it on to someone else?" "I'm just tired. Besides, this isn't the time to talk about this. If you continue to do this, this area will be gone before my successor can show his might," Shu Xi said at this moment. That's right. Hearing this, no one cared about Shu Xi anymore. "Hey, what's wrong with you guys? Have you forgotten your responsibilities?" Shu Xi was even more displeased when she saw this and shouted loudly, "Of course we have not forgotten our duty. However, our responsibility doesn't lie in your area. This area is actually the responsibility of you and your successor. It's fine if you're not grateful for our help, but you're actually grumbling here." A cold and arrogant voice was transmitted through the mysterious power, causing Shu Xi's body to feel uncomfortable. "That's right, it's a favor for us to help. It's our duty not to help," another protector said. Hearing this, Shu Xi could not help but be stunned. She was momentarily speechless. In fact, it was just as the protectors had said. They had no obligation to help this area. Their actions now were already a sign of their responsibility. As for turning this place into a battlefield to fight, she, who had messed up this area, had no right to criticize them. At this moment, the protectors had already thrown Shu Xi to the side and continued to work hard to defend themselves against the other protectors. As they fought, time and space in this area were twisted apart. The earth cracked, the mountains turned into powder, all living beings were destroyed, civilizations collapsed, and cultivators fell into a doomsday disaster. It was a scene of the end of the world. Just from this change alone, the number of living beings that died could be calculated in the trillions. Moreover, this number was still increasing at an unimaginable speed. It could be said that this area had become a land of despair for living beings. Almost every living being was in pain, wailing, and powerlessly cursing the heavens and the earth, cursing everything they could think of at this moment. On the Central Guardian platform, Luo Fan was still working hard to refine the platform. He did not pay any attention to the changes in this area at all. Shu Xi was stunned for a long time. In the end, she finally returned to her senses from the endless wailing and pain. In the end, she gritted her teeth, turned around, and flew in the direction of the platform. In other words, she quickly flew in the direction of Luo Fan. The closer she got to the platform, the more the space-time trembled and the laws became chaotic. Normally, with Shu Xi's strength, it was impossible for her to get close to the platform. However, at this moment, due to the agitation in her heart, she recklessly charged towards the platform. During this process, her body suffered endless impacts. The traces of mysterious power that she grasped frantically gathered around her, protecting her body and resisting the various terrifying changes in the surroundings. During this process, blood continuously gushed out of her pores. Her flesh and blood were constantly being torn apart and devoured by the surrounding space-time, turning into powder and disappearing without a trace of course. She was also a tribulation stage powerhouse. After all, it went without saying how powerful her vitality was. During this process, her body was recovering at every moment. Flesh and blood grew, blood was produced, and power was born out of thin air. She did everything she could to recover her body and strengthen her power as she worked hard to get closer to the platform. As she put her life on the line, her body began to rapidly approach the platform. In the end, she finally arrived at a position that was only a light year away from the platform. When she arrived here, the space-time in front of her no longer had any traces of normal space-time. All the boundaries and shackles of the heavens and earths hidden in the space-time had been broken. All the heavens and earths were mixed together. All the power of the heavens and earths gushed out from the heavens and earths without reservation, intertwining with the power that gushed out from the other heavens and earths, forming a terrifying chaos. An astonishing power erupted, enough to kill, block, and destroy everything. Facing such a scene, even Shu Si had no way of passing through it. After all, to her, the space-time in front of her would instantly turn into powder and disappear without a trace if she entered it alone. Under such circumstances, she was more determined to risk her life than before, and it was impossible for her to barge into it directly. After all, risking her life was one thing, but there had to be value in it. At the very least, she had to achieve the results she wanted. Losing one's life for nothing and abandoning everything for nothing was not something most people would do, let alone a cultivator like her. Seeing that there was such a powerful obstruction in front of her, and the scene behind her that was like hell on earth, Shu Si's heart was filled with inexplicable hesitation. In the end, she roared furiously. "Aren't you a guardian? Why aren't you shouldering your responsibilities?" Her roar, which was wrapped in a mysterious power, was directly sent into the chaos in front of her and transmitted to the platform. It was only a light year, which was not considered far for this woman. It was even more so for the mysterious power that she controlled. Therefore, the voice actually penetrated the space-time and the terrifying chaos and reached Luo Fan directly, where he heard it. Although the voice was already greatly exhausted and even became undetectable, it was still delivered to Luo Fan in the end. Hearing this voice, Luo Fan's ears twitched. In a flash, he had already used the platform's power to scan the entire area and finally locked onto Shu Si, who was a light year away. Hearing this voice, Luo Fan's ears twitched. With the help of the platform's power, he scanned the entire area and finally locked onto Shu Si, who was a light year away. He also saw the extremely stubborn emotions in her eyes. At that moment, he could not help but sigh and say, "The situation now is not something that I can interfere with, right?" When he saw the stubbornness in her eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and say, "The current situation is no longer something that I can interfere with, right?" His voice directly penetrated the chaos in the surroundings and rang in Shu Si's ears, allowing her to hear it clearly. To Shu Si, having a reaction was the best reaction. She immediately said anxiously, "Why can't you interfere? As long as you stop and let this area return to normal, they naturally won't have a reason to interfere and will naturally retreat." That's not necessarily true. If I restore peace here, they will use the reason that I've committed endless sins and need to be punished to attack me. It's even more impossible for them to retreat. In that case, this place will lose the chaos and I won't have any defense. Won't the outcome be even worse? Said Luo Fan. Of course, he was just casually making up an excuse. After all, he had already refined the platform. Although it seemed like it would take forever, he was still improving bit by bit. Under such circumstances, how could he give up? Shu Si was at a loss when she heard what he said. Although Luo Fan had just casually found reason, and it could even be said to be an excuse, she knew that the situation that Luo Fan had mentioned was extremely likely to happen. It was indeed possible that those guardians would continue to stay here with the excuse of wanting to punish Luo Fan and use this place as a battlefield to resolve their conflicts. After all, it was too difficult for them to find a battlefield normally. Moreover, it was unacceptable for them to use the area they were guarding as a battlefield. Although they appeared to be so cruel and heartless in this area, they were not much worse than Shu Si in their respective areas of protection. In addition to abiding by their own duties, more importantly, their attitude towards that area determined the platform's attitude towards them. The better they treated that area, the better the platform treated them. For example, if they did what Shu Si did, even if they left the platform, it would still respond to their summons. Just like Shu Si at this time. With such a background, how could they easily let go of such an excellent battlefield in the area where Luo Fan was? Then you should expel them. This is your territory now. Are you willing to watch this area be destroyed? Shu Si said anxiously at this moment. This place will not be destroyed. Luo Fan said at this moment. This area and the Guardian platform, which was also the sky-reaching platform, were almost one. As long as the platform did not disappear, the surrounding area could eventually recover no matter how thoroughly it was destroyed. As for the living beings in this area, it was not a problem for Luo Fan. It was not only because he could resurrect these living beings at any time and restore them to their original appearance. It was also because these living beings were simply ephemeral in his eyes. Nowadays, even an ordinary cultivation session might take tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and even a deep seclusion session might take hundreds of millions of years, or even billions of years. Under such circumstances, living beings with a lifespan of less than 100 years would only live for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of millions of years at most after cultivation. To him, what was the difference between living beings that were ephemeral and ephemeral? In his opinion, dying now and dying millions of years later was just the difference between dying in the blink of an eye and dying in the next blink of an eye in this case. How could he care about the life and death of these living beings? How could he be moved because of their life and death? In fact, this was the mentality of almost all the Guardians. It was because of this mentality that they could attack without any scruples at this time. It could even be said that if Shu Si had not been the guardian of this area for hundreds of millions of years, her mentality towards the living beings in this area would not be too different. She still had the mentality of viewing them as ants, and she also did not care when their ephemeral lives would be lost. This kind of mentality was abhorrent to ordinary living beings. Perhaps if ordinary mortals knew about this, they would feel extremely disgusted and even hate them and treat them like demons. However, this was a mentality that one would naturally have when they reached a certain level. As for the unchanging mentality, no matter what level one reached, one's mentality would be the same as an ordinary person's, and they would still be able to see ordinary people as their own kind, and they would still be able to grieve and cry over the death of ordinary people. Not to mention that it was impossible for such a cultivator to exist. Even if such a cultivator did exist, he would not be able to live for long. Different levels of power required different levels of insight and different levels of mentality. Using the mentality of an ordinary person to control the power that could destroy millions of worlds was as absurd as a baby trying to control the switch of a nuclear weapon. If one day, due to the change in mentality, one might be able to harm others and oneself. Not to mention, the mentality of an ordinary person did not mean that they had the heart of immortality. Without this heart of immortality, living would only be a torture, and they would kill themselves sooner or later. In other words, even if one's cultivation realm rose to an unimaginable level, one could still maintain the mentality of an ordinary person. This was something that only mortals could imagine. What about them? What about those living beings? They're also your people, right? Don't you care about their lives? At this moment, Shu Si had already lost her normal mentality, and she yelled loudly. Those living beings only live for a day and die at dusk. Do you think that if I don't interfere, they will live for a long time? Luo Fan said. It's only a short time for us. For them, it's a lifetime. Shu Si was still unwilling to let it go. Don't worry, I could just revive them after this. Anyway, this is just a small matter. Luo Fan couldn't stand being annoyed by her, so he sighed and said, Hearing this, Shu Si was stunned. At this moment, she realized that her mentality seemed to have been influenced by some kind of emotion. She actually did not think of such a simple thing before. Indeed, as long as those living beings were revived after this, wouldn't it be fine? Even she could easily do this with the help of that platform. Why did she not think of this at all? Seeing that Shu Si had calmed down and was lost in thought, Luo Fan's heart moved. A mysterious force was sent through the boundless chaos and directly wrapped around Shu Si. With another push, Shu Si was sent to the place where the chaos was not as intense. When Shu Si returned to her senses, she realized that she was in a place that was only slightly shaking. In an extremely distant place where even light had not reached, there was an extremely chaotic aura coming from afar. At this moment, she knew that she had received the favor of that platform's owner. Forget it, I don't care about these things anymore. She sighed and moved, directly stepping into the depths of the void. At this moment, she released the mysterious force that she controlled and began to create a normal space around her. In other words, a dojo was created. With her abilities, this small matter was naturally not a problem. Especially with the help of the mysterious force, everything was even simpler. After the dojo was built, her mysterious power seeped out and directly separated the dojo from the outside world, isolating it from the outside world. The subtle vibrations that were constantly transmitted from outside the dojo completely disappeared. Chapter 21:38. Amidst this chaotic calm, this region that spanned an unknown number of large worlds continued to collapse. The civilizations within were continuously shattered, and the living beings within were continuously erased. The scene of the end of the world continued to spread. Gradually, the entire region turned into a chaotic light. The world, energy, laws, and everything else on a deeper level gradually mixed together, forming an indescribable chaos from the beginning until now. Only tens of thousands of years had passed. In this chaos, the protectors in various directions did not have any intention of stopping. Instead, they continued to use the mysterious power to treat this place as a battlefield, constantly resolving the various conflicts that had accumulated over countless years. Moreover, as the news gradually spread, not only did the protectors in the vicinity send their mysterious power over to resolve their conflicts, but the protectors that were not nearby also sent their mysterious power over to resolve their conflicts in this way. This region gradually became a communication center for the protectors in a certain form. If this place was a little more peaceful, it might become the true core. However, it was clear that all of this was a great disaster for the civilizations in this region. Not only was it a disaster for the civilizations in this region, but it was also a disaster for the living beings in the boundless world within this region. Originally, the cultivators in the many lower worlds were constantly pursuing transcendence. They pursued to be able to cross the barriers of the world and descend into this world that was countless times more vast and vast than the lower worlds. However, even though they'd achieved their goals in this calamity, they'd also paid with their lives in order to achieve their goals. They'd become a part of the chaos, and they'd been completely minced into pieces and assimilated into the boundless chaos. Amidst the chaos, only 2 locations remained intact. One of them was none other than the Guardian platform that guarded this region. In other words, it was the sky-reaching platform that Luo Fan was continuously refining. After all, the mysterious power that this platform possessed was not inferior to the mysterious power of the other platforms at all. Under such circumstances, this platform naturally had enough ability to resist the various mysterious powers that the other platforms sent over. In other words, it was impossible for the other mysterious powers to invade the range of this platform, so it was naturally impossible for them to cause chaos in this region. Of course, it was only on this platform, because the platform itself was currently resisting Luo Fan's refinement. The region near this platform had almost completely destroyed it with its own power and became absolutely chaotic. There was no need for the other mysterious powers to take effect at all. As for the second location, it was the place where Shu Si was located. Compared to the platform that Luo Fan was on, where the other mysterious powers could not invade and damage it at all. The dojo that Shu Si was always different. After all, the mysterious power that Shu Si grasped was insignificant. Compared to the protectors that controlled the platform, this power could not be more insignificant. If they were willing, they could charge over forcefully and easily crush her mysterious power. The reason why the dojo was still intact under such circumstances was that the protectors were unwilling to do so. After all, Shu Si was a former guardian no matter what, even though she didn't have much contact with the other guardians. Although she did not have much contact with the other protectors, this also meant that there was not much conflict between her and the other protectors. In the absence of conflict, the protectors were still willing to give her some face and leave her some space for herself. It was precisely because of this reason that this dojo was still able to remain unscathed under the circumstances that countless large areas of the world had become chaotic. It was even to the extent that it was able to absorb the profundities of various mysterious powers through the mysterious power stirred up by the chaos in this area, and then deepen its control over the mysterious power and raise its own cultivation realm. Of course, this was only temporary. If the Guardians were to fight, these original concerns would naturally be gradually thrown aside by them. The face that they originally gave Shu Si was naturally thrown away in the process. Therefore, although this dojo could be said to be in good condition for the time being, it was only temporary. With the passage of time, this dojo would eventually be destroyed one day. The only thing that needed to be puzzled was when it would happen. Shu Si did not think too much about this. Although she had already thought it through and understood that the destruction of this region was only temporary, and everything would be restored once the matter was over, the protector mentality that she had accumulated over the years still made her feel extremely uncomfortable. At this time, she could only completely immerse herself in comprehending the mysterious power in order to maintain her mental balance and not do stupid things like stopping the other protectors in the past. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, another 10,000 years had passed. In the past 10,000 years, the number of protectors that joined this region to resolve conflict had exceeded 10 million. The mysterious power of so many protectors crisscrossed, fought, and schemed against each other. In the process, all sorts of unimaginable powers were triggered, and the appearance of this region was gradually changed. This change naturally pushed this region into an even more chaotic abyss. However, the result of this advancement was to gradually produce a subtle order in this region, gradually giving birth to all sorts of living beings and civilizations that were born because of the chaos. This was obviously a manifestation of things going in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. One day, a certain chaotic civilization under the control of a mysterious power swept across the region where Shu Si's dojo was located. As they clashed, the chaos broke through the boundaries and directly broke the concealment of the dojo hidden in the depths of the chaos, revealing the appearance of the dojo. Compared to normal order, the order that was born from the extreme chaos was similar on the surface, but it was the complete opposite in essence. At this moment, when the dojo appeared in front of the chaotic civilization, it was like a spark falling into a boundless ocean, instantly triggering an intense reaction from the chaotic civilization. In an instant, the various civilizations completely let go of the enmity and conflict between each other. They directly changed their target and made Shu Si's dojo their target. They frantically pounced on it and began to attack it. They wanted to completely destroy this dojo, completely destroy this thing that was completely different from their chaotic civilization, and return the universe to the appearance that they were most familiar with. As for this, if the protector used his mysterious power to control and stop it, then naturally nothing would happen. However, it was obvious that the protectors would give Shu Si some face and not take the initiative to attack Shu Si's dojo. However, that was all. They naturally couldn't be bothered with the spontaneous evolution of this chaotic encounter. Obviously, at this moment, the chaotic civilization's attack on the dojo was the evolution of this chaotic nature. In this case, it was naturally impossible for any protectors to intervene in this change. Hence, the final outcome was that this dojo, which had existed steadily in this chaotic region for more than 20,000 years, gradually collapsed and disintegrated due to the conflict between the chaotic civilizations. As the dojo collapsed and disintegrated, the owner of this dojo, Shu Si, did not take any action. He calmly watched as the civilizations from the Chaos era attacked this dojo and destroyed it, causing one of the two order regions in this Chaos era to gradually disappear in the chaos. As for why she did this, the reason was very simple. What's the point of maintaining this dojo? It's just a dojo. If they wanted it, couldn't they just find another place to establish a dojo? What's the point of going against the chaotic general trend for this dojo? This was what she thought. Seeing that the dojo was gradually collapsing, Shu Si sighed and took a step forward. Under the mysterious power that had become much more subtle, her figure flashed and disappeared from the dojo that was about to collapse. She appeared in another region without the chaotic civilizations and prepared to establish another dojo for her to live in and cultivate. At this moment, the moment she disappeared from the dojo lost her support, and its resistance against the chaotic civilizations was instantly reduced by many times. As this happened, the Taoist field suddenly collapsed, and all the order within it was instantly annihilated. At this moment, the cultivators who were fighting in this region with the help of the mysterious power suddenly felt something strange. It was as if some indescribable change had occurred. Shu Si frowned, and a complicated expression appeared in her eyes. At this moment, an indescribable subtle fluctuation suddenly swept out from the Guardian platform below Luo Fan. It instantly swept through the entire chaotic region and swept through the tens of millions of mysterious powers. The moment this fluctuation swept past, the many Guardians felt their hearts skip a beat. For a moment, they couldn't help but stop what they were doing. They began to control the mysterious power and transform it into a defensive posture, preparing to resist some kind of attack that might appear. At this moment, an indescribably huge mysterious power rushed out from the platform along with the fluctuation. It instantly swept through the entire chaotic region and enveloped all the chaotic civilizations and mysterious powers. The mysterious power that swept out from the platform along with the fluctuation was so huge that it surpassed what the tens of millions of protectors had ever seen in their lives. Even if they activated the platform they were on with all their strength, they would not be able to unleash such a huge mysterious power. In fact, it was only 1% of this mysterious power. In an instant, this terrifying mysterious power snatched away the Guardians' control over their mysterious power. It directly cut off the Guardians' perception of the mysterious power and their perception of this area. Along with this change, the platforms in the tens of millions of locations suddenly began to tremble violently. At the same time, the protectors on the platforms seemed to suffer indescribable pain. Their bodies suddenly spasmed, and they cried out in pain. Some protectors even sprayed out blood from their bodies. The scene was extremely tragic. The protectors themselves controlled a huge amount of mysterious power, and this mysterious power could easily affect the surrounding space-time and laws. During the process of their incomparable pain, the surrounding space-time began to change. Cold winds blew, and a sea of blood surged. It looked like the place they were in had suddenly become hell. How can there be such powerful power? Furious roars came from the mouths of the Guardians who could barely speak. Their voices were filled with disbelief and disbelief. These voices spread far away and directly covered the area they were guarding. They even spread out of the area they were guarding, stirring up the wind and clouds, causing the entire region and space-time to become chaotic. If I knew this would happen, I would have given up on the dojo a long time ago. At this moment, Shu Si said with a regretful expression. However, through his familiarity with the platform, he had already thought of many things and vaguely understood the root cause of all these changes. All of this was probably because the protective instinct of the platform had finally been triggered. As for why it was triggered, perhaps it was because in this area, apart from the platform, there was no longer any place that still had order. In other words, it was precisely because the Tao ground she'd established had been destroyed that this area of countless large worlds had lost all order and had finally drawn out the protective instinct of the platform that no other existence had noticed before, causing the platform to release such an inconceivable and mysterious force to resolve all the chaos in this area. How could she not feel regretful when she guessed all of this? If she had thought of this earlier, the chaos in this region might have been restored 10,000 years ago. Naturally, the chaos in the recent 10,000 years would not have appeared. Just as Shu Si was secretly regretting, Luo Fan, who was on the platform, was secretly pleasantly surprised, because he suddenly sensed that when the platform released that terrifying and mysterious experience, the ability to resist him in the depths of the platform had suddenly shrunk by countless times. Initially, he would have needed decades to make progress, but now he had obtained it in an instant. In other words, with every breath, he had refined the deepest level of the platform to a level that he would have needed thousands or even tens of thousands of years to reach. To him, such a change was simply a heaven-shaking joy. He did not have time to think about what exactly caused such change. At this moment, he was making the best use of his time and did everything he could to increase his speed. He worked hard to refine the platform and transform all the depths of the platform into the traces of mysterious power that he had condensed. The terrifying mysterious power had to do a lot of things, and cutting off the connection between the mysterious power and the Guardians was only the first step. Next, the second step was obviously to get rid of the mysterious power and stop it from destroying this region. Next, he had to erase the chaos caused by the mysterious power and restore order to this region. Finally, he had to resurrect everything that had been destroyed because of the chaos. Every single one of these steps was not easy, and it took a lot of time to complete. In other words, at this time, for Luo Fan, his extremely convenient action of refining the platform could naturally last for quite a long time. Luo Fan did not care about all of this. He did not know the reason, so he naturally did not know how much time he had to refine the platform. Therefore, at this time, he seized every moment and used all his energy and mind to replace the power inside the platform. In other words, he had to refine the platform. In this state where every moment was equivalent to decades, his refining of the platform became more and more profound as time passed. In the end, after a year, he finally completely transformed the last structure in the depths of the platform with his mysterious power as the core. This also meant that he had truly, completely refined the platform. In that instant, he suddenly felt that he had become one with the platform. It was as if the platform had become an extension of his body. A feeling of flesh and blood merging with the platform came from it, making him feel an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Endless information was instantly transmitted to his heart through the platform, allowing him to instantly understand many things that he had never understood before. At this moment, he understood why he had suddenly obtained such convenience and could refine the platform hundreds of millions of times faster than before. Chapter 2139. I didn't expect it to be like this. After refining the platform completely, the cause and effect of everything naturally appeared in Luo Fan's mind, and he could not help but sigh. Originally, he was just in no mood to care about the actions of the other Guardians, but he did not expect that this kind of indulgence would bring him such amazing benefits in the end. It actually allowed him to directly compress the refining process that would have taken hundreds of millions of years to complete in such a short time. After sighing with emotion, he couldn't help but feel grateful to those Guardians. If it weren't for you guys, I'm afraid I would have to waste a lot of time. He secretly thanked them and took action. He mercilessly divided, scattered, devoured, and fused the mysterious power left by the many Guardians and completely integrated it into this large area. Although he was grateful, he still did what he had to do. That was Luo Fan's way of doing things. Although the actions of the Guardians indirectly brought him considerable benefits, it was not their own will. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need for him to really thank them. Besides, even if he really thanked them, it did not mean that he had to watch them do whatever they wanted in the protected area of his platform. After all, this area was just a meaningless area to him previously. But now, after he completely refined the platform, the significance of this area had become completely different. This was also what he only understood after he completely refined the platform. In fact, this area was the source of the power of the Guardian platform. That's right. It was not the existence of this area that allowed this area to exist, but the existence of this area that allowed this platform to exist. It was precisely because of the vast space and time in this area, the boundless laws, the infinite heaven and earth, and the endless civilizations mixed together to produce a reaction, that this platform could possess such an incredible and mysterious power, and it could also provide Luo Fan with research resources. After understanding this, how could his feelings about this area not change? Although he couldn't make it his life's goal to guard this area like Shu Si, he couldn't sit back and watch as the other Guardians destroyed this area. As the mysterious power that poured into this area was scattered, devoured, and fused, the owners of the mysterious power were heavily injured under some unimaginable mysterious communication. Even the lightest one vomited a mouthful of blood, and the more serious ones even had their bodies directly shattered by the platform under their feet, and it took them a long time to recover. For the Guardians, this was a huge loss, but for this area, it was a great gain. Previously, the mysterious power that the platform automatically emitted had almost eliminated the chaos in this area. At this moment, as the mysterious power fused, the order in this area began to be established at an unimaginable speed. The source of the mysterious power was one of the results of the joint reaction of the various existences in the entire area, and it naturally represented a certain characteristic of these existences. If it was fused into a certain area, it would naturally strengthen that area in all aspects. Therefore, it couldn't be more normal for such a scene to occur. At this time, Luo Fan once again took action. His heart moved slightly, and he raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. Shu Si, who had been quietly watching the evolution of this area in a certain space-time, felt her entire body tremble. She was wrapped by an irresistible and terrifying force, and with a slight pull, she was pulled to a place that she was very familiar with, but also a little unfamiliar at the same time. It was the platform that she had stayed on for an unknown period of time, but now, it had changed a lot. At the same time, she also saw a man who gave her complicated feelings, Luo Fan. What do you plan to do? I don't think you need me for anything. Shu Si looked at Luo Fan and said with a frown. She naturally had a lot of resentment towards Luo Fan. After all, she had watched the place that she had guarded for such a long time be completely destroyed. Even if she knew that it was only temporary and could recover at any time, it was impossible for her not to feel resentful. When Luo Fan heard this, he smiled and said, "Naturally, I need your help with something. You should be extremely familiar with this area, right? Then, help me restore this area." When she heard this, Shu Si was stunned, and a blank look appeared in her eyes. After a while, the blank look turned into disbelief, and she cried out, "What do you mean? Are you going to return the Guardian platform to me?" To a certain extent, you can say that. Luo Fan smiled. When she heard this, Shu Si looked at Luo Fan as if she was looking at a lunatic. From Luo Fan's words, it was obvious that he would rather give up the platform because it was too troublesome to restore this area. This kind of person was simply like the kind of person who would give up because it was too troublesome to wash the peaches of immortality. However, whether this was true or not, and whether Luo Fan was crazy or stupid, Shu Si couldn't give up this opportunity. At this moment, she instantly cried out, "All right, come right now." When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't hesitate. He only smiled faintly and grabbed the woman to the platform. He directly opened up the depths of the platform and waited for the woman to leave her mark on it. The woman raised her hand and pointed at the platform without hesitation. Her mark was deeply engraved in the depths of the platform, and it reached a depth that she couldn't reach before. As she left her mark in the depths of the platform, she sensed the mysterious power that she was extremely familiar with. When that mysterious feeling surged up again, She truly believed that what Luo Fan said was true. He actually handed over the ownership of the platform to her. After confirming this, she looked at Luo Fan with an indescribably strange gaze. You really are crazy. After a long time, she came to a conclusion. She suddenly raised her hand and pointed at Luo Fan. A majestic, mysterious power surged out of the platform and turned into a huge hand that slapped towards Luo Fan. Although she couldn't resist Luo Fan when she controlled the platform back then and was easily subdued by Luo Fan, it was only in the past. However, that was only in the past. Compared to back then, she had already made great progress. Her understanding of the mysterious power was also incomparable to before. In this way, the strength that she could display when controlling the mysterious power was at least 100 times stronger than before. Under such circumstances, she was confident that if she attacked Luo Fan now, she would have a great chance of winning. She might even be able to easily subdue him. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan only had an indescribable expression on his face. He looked at the palm that was rapidly approaching him with a smile that did not seem like a smile. When the palm was about to reach him, he raised his hand and gently beckoned. The palm suddenly collapsed and turned back into a mysterious power. It began to swim around him like an extremely obedient divine dragon. Seeing this scene, Shu Si could not help but have a look of disbelief on her face. How was this possible? Even if she was unwilling to admit that Luo Fan could remain unscathed under her attack, she knew that it was highly possible. After all, although Luo Fan's previous actions seemed crazy, she had to admit that Luo Fan was an expert who was many times stronger than her. Even if such an expert only had a little bit of rationality left, it would be enough to make her suffer. No matter how powerful her attack was, it was highly likely that it would fail when facing such an expert. But no matter how she thought about it, Luo Fan could remain unscathed. However, she did not expect that Luo Fan would use such a method to deal with her attack. Have you forgotten what I was doing? Luo Fan smiled faintly. The fact that he was able to give Shu Si the authority to control the platform naturally meant that he was confident that he could subdue any thoughts and actions that Shu Si might take. Directly turning hostile and attacking him was obviously the easiest method to guess out of all the various methods he could think of. As for how he did it, it was even simpler. The platform had already been completely refined by him. In other words, in the depths of all the mysterious powers on the platform, they had been imprinted with his most profound imprint. Under such circumstances, he could naturally control all the mysterious energy on the platform as he wished, including the portion of the mysterious energy that had been imprinted by the woman. After all, the woman had only left her imprint in the depths of the platform. She did not even reach the source of the mysterious power. In this way, no matter how profound her control of the mysterious power seemed to be, it was in fact limited to the surface. In this way, it would be as easy as flipping his hand for Luo Fan to seize the authority to control the mysterious power. What happened just now could not be more natural. Since he made a mistake, he naturally had to be punished. Although Luo Fan already knew that Shu Si would most likely attack him after obtaining the mysterious power, it did not mean that he would forgive such an attack. With a thought, the mysterious power that had almost fused with Shu Si instantly erupted. A terrifying impact instantly erupted from within Shu Si's body. In the blink of an eye, Shu Si's body was blown to pieces. Even the countless fragments were completely annihilated, turning Shu Si into the finest powder in the blink of an eye. With a slight gust of wind, she disappeared without a trace. In the blink of an eye, the platform once again returned to the state where only Luo Fan existed. After a while, a gentle breeze blew past, and bits of fragments began to gather from all directions. Not long after, they had already condensed into a human figure. It was none other than Shu Si. When this figure had just condensed, she was still a little confused, as if she did not know what was going on. When she saw Luo Fan clearly, she could not help but reveal a faint look of fear on her face. Evidently, She had recalled everything that Luo Fan had done before and could not help but feel fear towards him. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan only had an indescribable expression on his face. A faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "This is just a punishment for you. Don't worry, you're still alive. However, this is only this time. If something like this happens again, don't blame me for what I'm going to do." Hearing this, Shu Xi's body trembled, and she almost instinctively nodded. In that instant just now, Luo Fan had completely erased everything apart from the concept of her existence. This included her physical body, her spirit, her life source, and everything else. Although the concept of existence was still left behind, it was only to preserve her own existence. To her, she had truly died once. The fear of death, the indescribable pain, and the sorrow of falling into the deepest nothingness had completely drowned her just now, leaving her no way out. In that instant, she was even completely drowned by the endless negative emotions before her death, and her entire spirit was about to be pulled into the universe of negative emotions. In the end, although Luo Fan had used her concept of existence to revive her, the deep memories had already been deeply engraved in her heart. It was easy to imagine how she felt. If he had been a little slower just now, I would have really died. At this moment, such a thought flashed through Shu Xi's mind. She had not cultivated the concept of existence, and the concept of existence was actually still dependent on her body in reality. In other words, it was impossible for her to recondense her body and mind from the concept of existence and revive herself by herself. In that case, if she sank into that state of death for too long, her concept of existence would naturally gradually collapse, and in the end, it would completely dissipate, and she would truly die. With this understanding, she developed a deeper fear of Luo Fan. Regardless of how serious Luo Fan's warning just now was, she could not ignore it anymore. Even if Luo Fan was just casually threatening her, if she committed another crime, he would just scare her again like before, and she would not have the courage to try at all. After all, even if it was just a mere threat, the degree of danger was extremely shocking. If Luo Fan's control of time was not precise enough, she would really die. Seeing that Shu Xi had really become obedient, Luo Fan nodded and said, "All right, let's get started. The faster you are, the faster those living beings and civilizations will recover." Upon hearing this, Shu Xi hurriedly nodded and gradually withdrew her mind from the fear that Luo Fan had brought her before. She gradually shifted her attention to the vast area that the platform guarded. After all, she still had true feelings for this area. Seeing that this area had turned into a completely different order, completely different from before, and that the civilizations, races, and living beings were gradually turning into brand new existences, how could she sit back and do nothing? As she focused her mind, the fear that Luo Fan had planted in her heart before gradually dissipated. In an instant, the light and shadows around her body began to distort and change, and all sorts of strange lights and shadows gradually appeared. These lights and shadows were extremely crude at first, and she could not tell what exactly they were. However, as she concentrated and poured in the mysterious power, these lights and shadows became more and more detailed, and their true appearance and the places they referred to began to gradually reveal themselves. So this is how to use the mysterious power. At this time, Luo Fan was watching from the side, but with his deep control of the mysterious power, he clearly grasped every trick Shu Xi used to use the mysterious power. In an instant, he felt as if his horizons had been broadened, and he felt that his understanding of the mysterious power seemed to have deepened. After all, Shu Xi had controlled the mysterious power for hundreds of millions of years. Even if she did not spend much effort to unearth the deep principles of the mysterious power in the past, she had already reached an unimaginable height in terms of the surface application of the power. The various methods of application, tricks, and principles were not things that Luo Fan could surpass in a short period of time. For example, if Luo Fan wanted to completely resurrect all the civilizations and living beings in this large area, and restore all order. He would directly use the mysterious power to cover this area and use the indescribable characteristics of the mysterious power to reverse time and space, directly summon those living beings from the past, resurrect them, and then use their various characteristics to restore the order of this area. This way, it would naturally be able to completely restore this area and resurrect all living beings. However, the amount of mysterious power needed would be so great that even he felt heartache. However, what Shu Si was doing was clearly different.